Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did. Also, don't forget to press the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. From which country or city do you follow the channel? I never planned to become a park ranger in the most remote part of Alaska. My name is Kaskai, an old Tlingit name meaning one who follows trails. The elders in my mother's village would say it was predestined, but I had always attributed it to coincidence until that winter in the Denali wilderness. 3 years ago, I was drowning in student debt from an environmental science degree and suffering through mind-numbing corporate jobs in Seattle, when the posting appeared for a wilderness ranger position at one of Alaska's most isolated outposts. I applied without truly understanding what I was getting myself into. The ranger station, if you could dignify it with such an official-sounding name, was really just a reinforced cabin with solar panels and a satellite phone that worked approximately half the time. "You're crazy," my former roommate had said when I packed my life into 2 duffel bags. "Nobody goes to Alaska to be alone in winter. People disappear up there." I remember laughing. "That's exactly why I'm going, to get away from everyone." The helicopter dropped me at my post in late September, the pilot's final words still echoing in my mind as I write this. "Next supply runs in 6 weeks, weather permitting. Radio check every day at 1800 hours, miss 3 in a row, and we'll assume you're dead." He wasn't joking. My cabin sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, providing visibility for miles in 3 directions, with dense forest at my back. The structure was surprisingly well built. Thick logs chinked with a modern insulation that kept the brutal cold at bay, a wood stove that consumed logs voraciously, and a small attached shed for equipment storage. Solar panels powered basic electronics, and a natural spring nearby provided fresh water through a rudimentary filtration system. My responsibilities seemed straightforward. Monitor for wildfires, even in winter they can happen. Keep track of wildlife populations, assist any lost hikers, rare but not unheard of, and maintain the trails within my 50-square-mile territory. The Park Service described it as minimal human contact with maximum environmental stewardship. That first month passed in peace. I documented wolf tracks, spotted moose with calves, and repaired trail markers damaged in the previous spring's flooding. As daylight shortened dramatically, losing nearly 7 minutes each day, I settled into a routine that felt almost meditative. Then November arrived, bringing darkness that stretched for nearly 20 hours daily, and temperatures that plummeted to -30. The forest changed, quieter, darker, deeper somehow. I began noticing things, small things at first, animal tracks that stopped abruptly, as though the creature had vanished mid-stride. Strange patterns of broken branches that couldn't be attributed to snow load or wind. A persistent smell of wet soil and copper that didn't belong in the frozen landscape. One evening, while checking the perimeter around my cabin before nightfall, a habit born of caution rather than fear at that point, I found something unnerving. A perfect circle of twigs, each precisely the same length, arranged on the snow 15 feet from my door. No tracks led to or from it. I told myself it was probably formed by wind patterns. Nature creates strange symmetries sometimes. But I photographed it anyway, then destroyed the formation with my boot. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, the circle had reappeared. Same spot, same arrangement. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, covering yesterday's boot prints completely. A rational explanation existed, I was certain. Perhaps an animal behavior I hadn't studied, or a weather phenomenon particular to this region. I radioed my supervisor during our scheduled check-in. "Sounds like kids playing pranks," he said, voice crackling through static. "The nearest settlement is 60 miles away," I reminded him. "Hunters, then. Season opened last week. They're probably camping nearby." I didn't argue, but I had monitored the surrounding 5 miles daily. No one had entered my territory, at least no one human enough to leave tracks. That night I dreamed of being watched by something standing motionless at the forest's edge, half hidden behind a spruce tree. Its silhouette suggested a human form, but elongated and wrong in ways my sleeping mind couldn't articulate. I woke violently at 3:17 a.m., hearing what sounded like fingernails dragging across my cabin's outer wall. I grabbed my flashlight and service revolver, throwing open the door to scan the perimeter. The cold hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath as the beam of light cut through darkness so complete it seemed solid. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound, not even the wind or the typical forest rustlings. The silence felt heavy, watchful. Later that week, I found the first set of tracks that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. They resembled wolf prints, but were too large, and showed signs of an almost human gait. They approached my cabin from the forest, circled it entirely, then headed northwest. I followed them for half a mile before they simply stopped, not gradually fading due to changing terrain, but stopping mid-stride, as though whatever made them had simply ceased to exist. I took photographs, measured the stride length, and calculated the creature's approximate height based on its gait. According to my calculations, it stood nearly 7 feet tall. I told myself it was just a particularly large wolf walking through an optical illusion created by the snow's melt pattern. But deep down, I knew what the native elders would call it. The old stories my mother's people told around fires warned of such things. Creatures that wore skins not their own. Beings that mimicked humans but couldn't quite perfect the disguise. The Tlingit called them Kushtaka, ottermen who lured people to their deaths. Other tribes had different names, but the concept remained eerily similar across indigenous cultures throughout the region. I'm a scientist by training. I believe in evidence, in the rational world. But as the days grew shorter and darkness claimed more hours, I began to understand why humans invented monsters. Some fears are written into our DNA, our most primitive brains recognizing dangers our conscious minds refuse to acknowledge. Something was watching me from the trees, and it was getting closer every night. December brought storms that buried my cabin in snow up to the windowsills. I'd wake each morning to dig myself out, the physical labor warming my body while doing nothing to thaw the cold dread settling in my chest. The strange occurrences continued with increasing frequency. My radio began picking up fragments of what sounded like whispered conversations in a language I couldn't identify. Not Russian, not any native Alaskan dialect I recognized. Something older and guttural that made the hairs on my neck stand up. These transmissions always came between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m., regardless of how I adjusted the equipment. Probably interference from military installations, my supervisor suggested during our weekly check-in. They've got all kinds of classified operations up there. But we both knew the nearest military base was hundreds of miles away. On the 14th day of December, I found the first evidence that couldn't be rationalized. I was conducting my morning perimeter check when I spotted unusual markings in the snow about 30 yards from my cabin. As I approached, the pattern became clear. Words written in large, crude letters. I see you when you sleep. The message was drawn with a stick or finger, each letter nearly 2 feet tall. No footprints surrounded it. The nearest tree branch that could have fallen and created random patterns was over 50 feet away. I photographed it from multiple angles, included a ruler for scale, then obliterated it with my boots. That night, I double-checked every lock, window, and potential entry point to my cabin before settling in with my rifle across my lap. The temperature dropped to -40, causing the cabin's timbers to contract with gunshot-like cracks that jolted me awake hourly. Between these natural disturbances, I heard movement outside, something large circling my cabin with slow, deliberate steps. Dawn revealed fresh tracks in the new-fallen snow, the same elongated wolf prints, but this time with a disturbing addition. Every few steps, the tracks momentarily showed a human-like foot impression before reverting to animal prints. 2 days later, I found the first physical evidence inside my cabin, a small arrangement of twigs on my kitchen table, twisted into a crude human shape. I keep meticulous inventory of my supplies and living space. This item had not been there when I left for my morning patrol. The doors remained locked, windows intact. Nothing else was disturbed. I burned the twig figure in my wood stove and watched until it was completely ash. That night, I heard something scratching at my roof. Not the usual sound of snow shifting or branches scraping, but methodical, almost rhythmic scratching that moved from one end of the cabin to the other. In the morning, I discovered claw marks in the wood above my bedroom window. They were deep enough that they would have required considerable strength, and they formed a pattern similar to the woven twig design I'd burned. I began keeping a detailed journal of every incident, partly as documentation for the Park Service, and partly to maintain my own sanity. The rational part of my brain still searched for explanations. Territorial predators, extreme isolation playing tricks on my mind, perhaps even carbon monoxide from my stove affecting my perception. But nothing explained how the same twig figure I had burned appeared on my bed the following night, this time larger, and accompanied by a small pouch of what appeared to be animal teeth and fur. I radioed for an emergency evacuation, but a massive storm system had moved in, grounding all aircraft for the foreseeable future. "Hang tight," my supervisor advised. "We'll get you out as soon as the weather breaks. Should be 3 days, maybe 4. 4 days might as well have been 4 years. That evening, as darkness fell at the absurdly early hour of 3:15 p.m., I spotted movement at the forest's edge. I raised my binoculars and for a moment caught sight of what appeared to be a human figure standing between 2 spruce trees. It was tall, far taller than any normal person, with proportions that seemed subtly wrong, its shoulders too broad, its arms too long. I adjusted the focus, and it was gone. Later that night, the radio crackled to life without my touching it. Through waves of static, I heard what sounded like my own voice feeding back. "Day 47 in the wilderness. Something is watching me from the trees." It was a verbatim recitation of my journal entry from 3 days prior, a journal I kept locked in my desk drawer. I grabbed my emergency pack, threw on my extreme weather gear, and stepped outside with my rifle. If something was stalking me, I preferred to confront it rather than wait for it to choose its moment. The cold hit like a wall of needles, the air so frigid it crystallized my breath before it left my mouth. The forest stood silent, trees heavy with snow, not even wind disturbing the perfect stillness. I scanned the tree line with my tactical flashlight, the beam seeming feeble against the enormous darkness. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice sounding small and foolish in the vast emptiness. "Show yourself." Nothing answered, but as I completed a full circuit around my cabin, I noticed something that chilled me more than the Arctic air. A single set of tracks led away from my cabin into the forest, tracks that precisely matched my boot prints, as though someone wearing identical footwear had walked backward, placing each step perfectly into my earlier impressions. I followed these tracks with my light, watching as they disappeared into the darkness between the trees. For a brief moment, I considered following them, but quickly dismissed the thought. Whatever game this was, I wouldn't play by its rules. Back inside, I barricaded the door with my desk and sat with my back to the wall, rifle ready. The night crawled by in increments of terror, each unexpected sound magnified by my fraying nerves. Around 2 a.m., I heard something new, a voice barely above a whisper speaking just outside my window. "Kaski, let me in. I'm so cold, Kaski." It spoke my name with perfect pronunciation, not the Americanized version I used professionally, but the traditional Tlingit pronunciation my grandmother had used, with the subtle inflection that non-native speakers could never quite master. I remained motionless, controlling my breathing, finger resting lightly on my rifle's trigger. "I know you're listening," the voice continued, somehow both distant and directly in my ear simultaneously. "We've met before. In your dreams. Let me show you my face." The window beside me fogged over from outside, and in the condensation, a finger drew the same symbol that had been carved into my roof. 3 days, the voice whispered. 3 days until the darkness is complete. Then I won't need your permission anymore. With a jolt of horror, I realized it referred to the winter solstice, December 21st, when this latitude would experience nearly 22 hours of darkness. After that, we wouldn't see the sun again for weeks. The solstice held significant meaning in indigenous cultures. It marked not just the darkest physical day, but a time when the boundary between worlds thinned, when things could pass through. That night, as I finally succumbed to exhaustion. I dreamed of running through the forest, pursued by something that wore my face on a body that bent and moved all wrong, like a puppet with too many joints. It called my name with my voice, but the words emerged twisted and backward. I woke to find frozen dirt on my floor, as though someone with muddy feet had walked a complete circle around my bed while I slept. My cabin no longer felt like shelter. It had become a trap. On December 19th, 2 days before the solstice, my radio squawked to life with an actual human transmission, the first legitimate contact I'd had in nearly a week. Through bursts of static, I made out a distress call from a hiker somewhere in my sector. Lost near the eastern ridge, temperature dropping, need assistance. I triangulated the signal as best I could with my limited equipment and calculated that the hiker was approximately 4 miles from my position. With only a few hours of dim twilight available, I knew any rescue attempt would mean returning after dark, precisely when I'd been avoiding the forest. But my duty was clear. No matter what strange occurrences plagued me, I couldn't leave someone to freeze to death in the wilderness. I geared up with my full winter survival pack, emergency medical supplies, GPS locator flares, and of course my rifle. I left a detailed note at my cabin explaining where I'd gone and when I expected to return, a standard safety protocol, though I questioned who would find it if I didn't make it back. The rational part of my brain recognized this thought as the paranoia of isolation. The other part wondered if I was walking directly into a trap. The trek through deep snow was grueling. The temperature hovered around -25, and the wind cut through my layers despite my specialized gear. I followed the ridgeline eastward, checking my handheld radio periodically for any further transmissions. About 3 miles in, I encountered the first sign of the hiker, a shredded backpack hanging from a tree branch. The tears in the fabric resembled claw marks, and the contents were scattered in the snow below. I collected what seemed useful, a half-empty water bottle, now frozen solid, an emergency thermal blanket, and a wallet containing identification. The hiker's name was Akiak Jensen, a 32-year-old with an Anchorage address. The mixed Yupik and Scandinavian name suggested he might have some connection to the region beyond mere tourism, perhaps explaining his presence in this remote area during winter. I continued following faint indications of human passage. Broken branches, occasional footprints preserved in sheltered areas, scraps of bright blue fabric that matched the torn backpack. These signs led me further east, toward a part of my territory I rarely patrolled due to its treacherous terrain, a maze of ice-slick ravines and unstable rock formations. As the meager daylight began to fade, I spotted what appeared to be a makeshift shelter tucked against a rock face, a blue tarp stretched between trees, partially collapsed under snow. I approached cautiously, announcing my presence. "Park Service, Akiak Jensen, are you here?" Something moved beneath the tarp, causing snow to slide off in clumps. I readied my flashlight and moved closer, pulling back the edge of the synthetic material. The shelter was empty, except for a hiking boot containing a sock, still warm. I checked my surroundings, scanning with both my eyes and ears for any sign of movement. Nothing moved in the gathering darkness except occasional snow falling from overloaded branches. "Jensen!" I called again, louder this time. "If you can hear me, respond." My voice echoed briefly before being swallowed by the dense forest. Then, faintly, I heard what sounded like a human voice from deeper in the ravine. "Help. Down here." I followed the sound cautiously, picking my way down the steep slope with the aid of my ice axe. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the sun's disappearance, and my extremities already ached despite my insulated gloves and boots. At the bottom of the ravine, I found footprints leading into a narrow crevice in the rock wall, a natural formation that might offer shelter from the wind, though it looked unsettlingly like the entrance to a den. I shined my light into the opening. "Jensen, Park Service here. I've come to help you." A figure huddled at the back of the shallow cave, knees drawn up, face concealed by the hood of a parka. As my light fell upon them, they flinched and turned further away. "Are you injured?" I asked, crouching at the entrance. "I need to get you back to my station before full dark." The figure shifted slightly. Something about their movements struck me as wrong, too fluid for someone suffering from hypothermia. too angular for natural human motion. "Cold," came the response, the voice oddly flat. "So cold." I reached for my pack to retrieve the thermal blanket. "I'm going to help you walk out of here. We have about 40 minutes before navigation becomes nearly impossible." The figure turned slowly toward me, still keeping their face shadowed. "You're Casque, not Ranger, not the generic help a stranded hiker might say." They spoke my name, my true name, with the same pronunciation I'd heard outside my window. I took an involuntary step backward, nearly losing my footing on the icy ground. "How do you know my name?" "Everyone knows the Ranger's name," the figure replied, rising to their feet with unnatural smoothness. They stood taller than seemed possible in the confined space. "You've been expected." I raised my rifle instinctively. "Stay where you are. Show me your face." The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, then slowly reached for its hood. I didn't wait to see what lay beneath. Every instinct screamed danger as I fired a warning shot into the rock wall beside the figure and began scrambling backward up the ravine slope. Behind me, a sound emerged that will haunt me until my dying day. Not a human scream of fear or pain, but a high-pitched, multi-toned keening that no human vocal cords could produce. It echoed throughout the ravine, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously. I climbed as fast as conditions allowed, abandoning proper technique in favor of raw speed. When I reached the top, I risked a glance backward. The figure stood at the ravine bottom, hood thrown back, but distance and shadows obscured its features. What I could discern with absolute certainty was that its proportions were fundamentally wrong. Limbs too long, neck bent at an angle that would snap human vertebrae, and a silhouette that seemed to waver and shift as though its outline couldn't maintain consistency. It began to climb, moving with the agility of a spider rather than a biped, covering ground at an impossible rate. I ran. The forest had grown completely dark, my powerful flashlight carving a tunnel through absolute blackness. Every shadow seemed to move independently, branches reaching like grasping fingers. The well-marked trail I'd followed earlier now seemed to shift and redirect, landmarks appearing in unexpected places. After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, I realized I was no longer heading in the right direction. My GPS showed me moving away from my cabin rather than toward it. Disoriented and panicking, I stopped to regain my bearings. The forest had fallen completely silent. No wind, no animals, not even the creak of trees. In that perfect stillness, I heard soft footsteps circling me, just beyond the reach of my light. "Who's there?" I demanded, aiming my rifle toward the sound. "Identify yourself." "You came," spoke a voice directly behind me. I whirled around, bringing my light to bear on a figure standing 10 feet away. This was not the entity from the ravine. This was a genuine human being, a native man in his 60s wearing traditional winter clothing with modern additions. "I've been tracking you for miles," he said calmly. "You're going the wrong way. Your cabin is northwest, not east." I kept my rifle trained on him, trust completely eroded by recent events. "Who are you? What are you doing out here?" "My name is Apanugpak. I live in the settlement 60 miles south." He gestured to the darkness behind me. "And I'm saving your life. That thing following you isn't your lost hiker." "What is it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "The old people have many names for them. My grandmother called them the skin stealers." He scanned the darkness with practiced eyes. "They hunt during the darkest days, take the form of those they encounter, but they can never get it quite right." As if summoned by his explanation, a trembling voice called from the darkness, a perfect mimicry of my own. "Help me, please. I'm the real Casque. This man is trying to trick you." Apanugpak remained unperturbed. "They learn voices quickly, words, names, but they don't understand meaning or context." Another voice joined the first, Jensen's flat tone from the ravine. "Don't trust him. He's one of them." Then another voice, this one sounding like my supervisor from the Park Service. "Ranger, report to base immediately. This man is dangerous." More voices joined the chorus, a cacophony of pleas and warnings from the darkness, each sounding like someone I knew or had encountered. My mother's voice, my former roommate, the helicopter pilot who had dropped me at my post. "They're trying to confuse you," Apanugpak said quietly. make you question what's real. Follow me closely. Don't look back." He set off northwest, moving with surprising speed and confidence despite the darkness. I followed, focusing on his back, trying to ignore the voices that multiplied and grew more desperate as we moved deeper into the forest. Behind us, something large crashed through the underbrush, gaining ground with each passing minute. We reached my cabin shortly before midnight, bursting through the door and securing it behind us. I immediately checked all windows and reinforced the barricades I'd erected days earlier. Apanugpak moved with practiced efficiency, examining the symbols I'd documented and nodding with grim recognition. "You've survived longer than most," he remarked, tracing the twig figure I'd preserved as evidence. "Most are driven mad within days of first contact, or they simply disappear." The perimeter of my cabin erupted with sound. Vocalizations that shifted from human pleas to animalistic growls, punctuated by heavy objects being hurled against the walls. The windows rattled but held firm. "What exactly are these things?" I demanded, checking my rifle despite knowing bullets might prove useless. "And why are they after me specifically?" Apanugpak settled into my chair, his weathered face illuminated by the wood stove's glow. "My people have lived in these lands for thousands of years. We know there are spaces where the world we understand meets other realms. Beings cross over, especially during certain times." "Like the solstice," I said, remembering the whispered threat. He nodded. "The boundaries weaken when darkness is strongest. These creatures, skinwalkers as some tribes call them, they're neither animal nor human. They exist in between. They covet what they can never truly have: humanity." "Why target a park ranger station?" "Isolation, opportunity." He gestured to my communication equipment. "And you represent connection. Someone who might alert others to their presence. They prefer to hunt unnoticed." Outside, something heavy landed on my roof, causing dust to shower from the ceiling beams. Claws or fingernails dragged slowly across the surface. "I've tracked these things for decades," Apanugpak continued, seemingly undisturbed by the assault on the cabin. "They've taken people from my community for generations. My own brother disappeared 40 years ago during winter solstice. The authorities called it exposure, accident. We knew better." "How do we fight them?" I asked, checking my ammunition stores. "Not with that," he said, nodding toward my weapon. "They can be wounded but not killed by conventional means. They fear fire, running water, and certain traditional materials." From his pack, he produced several small pouches and began placing them strategically around my cabin. At windows, the door, even the chimney opening. "Protective measures," he explained. "A mixture of herbs, minerals, and elements from their natural enemies. It won't destroy them, but it creates boundaries they hesitate to cross." The noises outside intensified, as though his actions had provoked the entities. Something large repeatedly slammed against the north wall, causing the entire structure to shudder. "They're testing for weaknesses," Apanugpak observed. "They'll continue until dawn, then retreat to wherever they hide during daylight hours." "And tomorrow night? The solstice?" His expression darkened. "Tomorrow, they'll be stronger than any other time. If they can't break in physically, they'll try to lure you out. They'll use every voice, every memory they've gathered from your mind. They may even appear as perfect duplicates of people you trust." "You seem to know an awful lot about creatures most people consider legends," I said, suspicion momentarily flickering through my exhaustion. He smiled grimly. "When you've hunted something for 40 years, you learn its ways. After my brother vanished, I dedicated my life to understanding these entities. I've tracked them across Alaska, northern Canada, even parts of Siberia. They migrate with the darkness." A new sound emerged from outside, a perfect imitation of Apanugpak's voice, calling my name. The real Apanugpak beside me raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. They've already copied me." The mimicry continued, the false Apanugpak outside now warning me that the man inside my cabin was an imposter, that I needed to escape immediately. "How do I know you're the real one?" I asked, only half joking, as exhaustion and stress clouded my judgment. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph, himself as a younger man standing beside another native Alaskan, both in hunting gear. "My brother," he said simply. The skinwalkers can take forms, voices, even memories to some extent, but they cannot comprehend human connections, family, love, grief. Ask it about this photo, and it will fail. The assault on the cabin continued throughout the night, a symphony of horror, scratching, pounding, voices pleading, threatening and crying. Occasionally faces pressed against the windows, distorted versions of human countenance, features slightly misaligned, expressions too exaggerated to be genuine. During a momentary lull, Apanugpak shared his theory. They're ancient, possibly predating human settlement in these regions. My grandmother believed they were once human shamans who performed forbidden rituals to gain power, becoming trapped between forms as punishment. That doesn't sound very scientific, I noted, though science had offered no explanations for what I'd experienced. Science has limits, he replied simply. It defines what it can measure and dismisses what it cannot. These entities exist in the spaces between what we understand and what we fear. Around 3 a.m., a new tactic emerged. The temperature inside the cabin plummeted suddenly, our breath visible despite the roaring wood stove. The fire itself seemed to diminish, flames turning blue and providing little warmth. They're drawing the heat, Apanugpak explained, adding more wood to the struggling fire. Another of their abilities, manipulating elements to weaken their prey. They induce cold, confusion, fear. They'll progress to hallucinations next. As if on cue, I began seeing movement in my peripheral vision, shadows detaching from corners, flowing across walls like liquid darkness. When I turned to look directly, nothing was there, yet the sensation of being watched from impossible angles intensified. Don't engage, Apanugpak warned. Looking directly invites connection. They can influence thoughts through sustained visual contact. The night stretched endlessly, our defenses tested repeatedly. Twice, Apanugpak reinforced his protective pouches when the entity's assaults focused on particular entry points. His calm demeanor never wavered, even when what appeared to be a hand, grotesquely elongated with too many joints, broke through a small gap in the window shutters, only to withdraw when he approached with a torch made from pitch-soaked wood. As the first faint lightening of the sky appeared, barely perceptible through the covered windows, but detectable in the sudden retreat of sounds outside, Apanugpak began preparing for the coming night. The solstice, he said grimly. We have approximately 6 hours of partial daylight to prepare. Tonight will determine whether we survive or join the countless others they've claimed. He instructed me to help create additional protective measures. Torches placed strategically around the cabin's exterior, a mixture of salt and other substances forming lines across thresholds, symbols drawn on doors and windows with a paste made from ingredients in his pack. These are not superstitions, he explained, noting my scientific skepticism. These are techniques refined through generations of encounters. The entities operate according to principles we don't fully understand, but they follow consistent patterns and limitations. As we worked, Apanugpak shared more of his knowledge, observations from decades tracking these creatures across the northern wilderness. They preferred to hunt alone until the final stage, when they would gather in groups. They could mimic any voice they'd heard, but struggled with logical conversation. They could appear as almost perfect human replicas, but often betrayed themselves through unnatural movements or inconsistent details. Most importantly, he added, checking the loads in his own custom shotgun, they feed on fear. The more terrified their victim, the stronger they become. That's why maintaining calm is our greatest weapon. By mid-afternoon, we had transformed my simple cabin into a fortified position against the coming siege. But one question still troubled me. You tracked these things for days to find me, I said. Why risk your life for a stranger? Apanugpak was quiet for a long moment before responding. 2 months ago, they took a child from our village, my granddaughter. The authorities called it another tragic accident, but I found her small tracks in the snow, alongside the larger ones I recognize all too well. His voice remained steady, but his eyes reflected decades of pain. I followed them here, to their hunting ground. You were not my target, but I cannot stand by while they claim another life. As the brief daylight began to fade, we took our positions. Whatever the night would bring, we would face it together. A scientist and a hunter, united against an enemy that defied rational explanation but demanded very real courage to confront. The final night of waiting had begun. Darkness fell like a heavy blanket, absolute and consuming. Inside the reinforced cabin, Apanugpak and I completed our final preparations as the first hints of activity stirred outside. Subtle at first, just movement among the trees visible through narrow gaps in the window coverings. "They're gathering," Apanugpak said, his voice low, more than I've ever seen in one location. I peered through a small observation port we'd created. In the dim glow of our exterior torches, shapes moved at the forest edge, some clearly quadrupedal, others bipedal but wrong in their proportions. They maintained distance from the light, circling our position with patient deliberation. "How many?" "At least 7 distinct entities," he replied after his own careful observation, possibly more hiding beyond visual range. The winter solstice, December 21st, had arrived, bringing with it nearly 22 hours of darkness at our latitude. If Apanugpak's knowledge proved accurate, this would be the night when the creatures were at their most powerful, most desperate, and most dangerous. Hours passed in tense vigilance. Unlike previous nights, the entities didn't immediately attack or attempt to breach our defenses. Their restraint was more unnerving than aggression would have been. "They're planning," Apanugpak noted, "coordinating. This is unusual behavior." Around midnight, the first real assault began, not with force, but with voices. They started as whispers, barely audible beneath the wind, then grew to conversational volume. Dozens of distinct voices called from the darkness, each sharing specific details only I could know. "Casque, remember when we broke Mom's favorite vase playing baseball indoors? You took the blame so I wouldn't get grounded." My sister's voice, perfect in every inflection and emotional nuance, recounting a childhood memory I hadn't thought about in years. "You still owe me $20 from that poker game last summer." My college roommate's distinctive laugh following the statement, exactly as I remembered it. More voices joined the chorus, each sharing intimate memories, inside jokes, references to shared experiences that no stranger could possibly know. The effect was profoundly disorienting. My rational mind knew these were mimicries, yet their perfect authenticity triggered emotional responses I couldn't fully suppress. "They're extracting memories through proximity," Apanugpak explained. "The longer they've observed you, the deeper they can reach into your past. Don't engage, no matter how authentic they sound." As the psychological assault continued, physical testing of our defenses resumed. Systematic pressure against doors, windows, and the roof. The creatures seemed to be identifying the weakest points of our fortress, noting where our protective measures were thinnest. Around 2 a.m., a new tactic emerged. The temperature within the cabin plummeted dramatically, our breath forming dense clouds despite the wood stove burning at maximum capacity. The cold penetrated layers of clothing, seeping into bones and muscles, making movement increasingly difficult. "Energy manipulation," Apanugpak grimaced, his normally stoic expression showing concern. "They're pooling their abilities." The protective pouches he'd placed began to frost over, their effectiveness visibly diminishing as ice crystals formed on their surfaces. The torches outside flickered weakly, their flames struggling against unnatural cold. "We need to reinforce the barriers," he instructed, moving stiffly toward his pack. "The cold weakens the properties of the protective elements." As we worked to refresh the defenses, a tremendous crash shook the cabin. Something had struck the roof with force equivalent to a falling tree. Wood splintered, and fine snow began sifting through a new crack in the ceiling. Apanugpak reacted instantly, grabbing a specially prepared torch and positioning it beneath the damaged section. "They're testing structural integrity. If they break through, do not look directly at them. Their true forms can paralyze with fear." Another impact rocked the structure, this one against the north wall. The entire cabin shuddered, and I heard the distinct sound of nails pulling from wood as the wall bowed inward slightly before resettling. "They're stronger than I anticipated," Apanugpak said, real worry evident in his voice. "This cabin won't withstand concentrated assault for long." As if confirming his assessment, coordinated impacts began striking the cabin from multiple directions simultaneously, roof, walls, even up through the floorboards. The structure groaned under the assault, seams widening, allowing freezing air to penetrate through expanding gaps. Through a widening crack beside the doorframe, I glimpsed movement, something inserting what appeared to be fingers, but too long, too jointed, with nails like curved talons. The digits probed the opening, seeking purchase to widen the breach. Apanugpak moved with surprising speed for his age, bringing his torch to the intrusion. The fingers withdrew instantly as flames approached, accompanied by a high-pitched sound that resembled both animal shriek and human scream simultaneously. "They can be injured," he confirmed, "but fire only repels, not destroys." The coordinated assault paused briefly as though the entities were reassessing their strategy. In that momentary quiet, a new voice spoke, not from outside, but seemingly from within the cabin itself. "Grandfather, please help me." The voice was small, female, childlike, and coming from the dark corner behind me. Apanugpak froze, his entire body tensing. Even in the dim light, I could see his face drain of color. "Sika," he whispered, using a name he had never mentioned before. From the shadows emerged what appeared to be a young native girl, perhaps 8 years old, wearing traditional winter clothing. She stood partially obscured by darkness, her features indistinct except for her eyes, which reflected the firelight unnaturally. "They hurt me, grandfather," the child said, her voice trembling. "I got away, but I'm so cold." Apanugpak's hand tightened on his weapon, knuckles white. For the first time since meeting him, I saw his resolve waver. "It's not her," I said firmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You told me yourself. They use our connections against us." The child took a step forward, now fully illuminated by the stove's light. She appeared completely normal, completely human. A perfect replica down to a small scar on her forehead that Apanugpak had described during our preparations. "Please," she pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. "Don't let them take me again." Apanugpak closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. When he opened them, the momentary weakness had vanished, replaced by cold determination. "My granddaughter died 2 months ago," he said evenly. "I buried her myself. You wear her form, but you are not Sika." The child's expression shifted, subtly at first, then dramatically, features elongating, mouth stretching horizontally beyond human limitations, eyes growing larger and darkening until they were black voids in her face. "We have her," the thing said, its voice now a distorted, multi-tone sound. "We have all of them. They're still aware, still suffering, every moment." Before either of us could react, it lunged forward with impossible speed. Apanugpak discharged his shotgun directly into the creature's chest, the impact throwing it backward against the wall. Instead of blood, black ichor splattered across the logs, sizzling like acid where it landed. The wounded entity made no sound, but outside, the chorus of voices rose in unified howling, rage or pain or both, impossible to distinguish. The physical assault on the cabin resumed with renewed fury, the entire structure now shifting on its foundation. "We can't stay here," Apanugpak shouted over the cacophony. "The cabin will collapse within minutes." "Where can we go?" I demanded. "There's nowhere to run." "There's one place." He began gathering essential supplies with practiced efficiency. 2 miles north, a river crossing. Running water creates a boundary they rarely cross. If we reach it, we have a chance. The prospect of venturing into open territory, surrounded by these entities, seemed like suicide. But as a support beam cracked overhead, showering us with splinters, remaining clearly meant certain death. We donned our extreme weather gear, armed ourselves with both conventional weapons and Apanugpak's specialized defensive tools, and prepared for the desperate flight. The plan was simple, but terrifying. Burst through the door, using torches to create a corridor through their ranks, then run full speed for the river crossing, never stopping regardless of what we saw or heard. "Remember," Apanugpak said, gripping my shoulder, "no matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, do not stop running. Do not look directly at them unless absolutely necessary, and if one takes me, do not hesitate. Continue to the river." I nodded, throat too dry for words. We positioned ourselves by the door, torches ready, weapons loaded. "On my mark," he said, hand on the barricade. 3, 2, 1. We burst into the night, into a nightmare beyond imagination. Chapter 6, River's Edge. The frigid air hit like a physical blow as we charged through the door. Immediately, shapes converged from all directions, some running on all fours with impossible speed, others loping forward on elongated limbs. In the torchlight, I caught glimpses of their features, animal-like yet wrong, human-like yet distorted, as though something had attempted to create living beings from incomplete understanding of anatomy. "Keep moving," Uppanugpak shouted, swinging his torch in wide arcs to maintain a perimeter around us. We ran through knee-deep snow, following a compass bearing rather than any visible trail. The entities flanked us on both sides, pacing our progress just beyond the torchlight's reach. Their movements had a fluid, almost hypnotic quality, like predators conserving energy while herding prey. The forest around us came alive with sound, voices calling from every direction, some pleading, others threatening, still others screaming in agony. They cycled rapidly through everyone I'd ever known, everyone Uppanugpak had mentioned, creating a disorienting cacophony designed to confuse and terrify. One voice rose above the others, my mother, crying out in pain, begging for help. The sound was so authentic, so viscerally familiar, that I involuntarily slowed, turning toward its source. "Do not listen," Uppanugpak commanded, grabbing my sleeve and pulling me forward. "They will use your compassion against you." We pressed on, our progress hampered by terrain and exhaustion. The creatures maintained discipline, keeping pace without directly attacking, waiting for weakness or mistake. About a mile into our desperate journey, the first direct assault came. A form burst from the darkness on our right flank, a nightmare amalgamation moving on four legs that became two as it rose to attack. Uppanugpak swung his torch, catching it across what approximated a face. The entity recoiled with a shriek, black ichor sizzling where the flames made contact. The attack seemed to trigger a change in tactics. More creatures converged, no longer content to simply track us. They darted in and out of the darkness, forcing us to defend in all directions simultaneously. Our progress slowed to a halting forward crawl. "We won't make it at this pace," I gasped, muscles burning from exertion and cold. "We have no choice," Uppanugpak replied grimly. "The river is our only hope." A particularly bold entity lunged directly for me, a twisted form wearing fragments of human features arranged in impossible configurations. I discharged my rifle point blank into its center mass. The impact threw it backward, black substance erupting from the wound, but it immediately began rising again, the damage already healing. "They regenerate," Uppanugpak confirmed my unspoken fear. "Conventional weapons only slow them." Our situation deteriorated rapidly. My torch burned dangerously low, the flame weakening as the fuel source depleted. The cold intensified beyond natural levels, each breath painful in my lungs. The entities grew more aggressive with each passing minute, their attacks more coordinated, more relentless. Then disaster struck. Uppanugpak's foot broke through the snow crust into a hidden hollow beneath, twisting violently. He fell with a sharp cry of pain, dropping both his torch and weapon. I turned back, helping him to his feet, but he couldn't put weight on the injured ankle. "Leave me," he ordered, retrieving his torch from the snow where it sputtered weakly. "I'll hold them back while you make for the river." "That's not happening," I replied, supporting his weight with my shoulder. We moved together or not at all. The delay had allowed the entities to tighten their circle around us. They moved with growing confidence, sensing our vulnerability. Through gaps in their ranks, I could see more joining from the forest depths, drawn to the imminent kill. With Uppanugpak injured, our pace slowed to an agonizing crawl. The river remained at least half a mile away, an impossible distance under current circumstances. Our torches burned dangerously low, darkness encroaching with each passing minute. In this moment of desperation, Uppanugpak made a decision. "Take this," he said, pressing a small leather pouch into my hand. "When you reach the river, break it open in the water. It will create a barrier they cannot cross." "We'll use it together," I insisted. He shook his head. "One of us must survive to warn others. These creatures are migrating, appearing in populated areas for the first time in centuries. Your scientific background combined with first-hand experience, people might actually listen to you." Before I could argue further, he pulled away from my support, standing painfully on his injured leg. From his pack, he withdrew his final preparation, a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth that gave off a pungent herbal odor. "This will draw them to me instead of you," he explained. "It contains elements they crave, fear pheromones from their previous victims, substances that attract their senses. I'll create a diversion. When you see them converge on me, run northeast. Don't stop for anything." "That's suicide," I protested. "I've hunted these things for 40 years, he said with grim determination. "Today I finish what began when they took my brother. Perhaps I'll even find Sika." In one fluid motion, he unwrapped the bundle and crushed it between his hands, releasing a cloud of dark powder that rose around him like smoke. The effect was immediate and shocking. Every entity in the vicinity went rigid, attention fixating on Apanugpak with predatory intensity. "Run, Keske," he commanded, already moving away from me, deliberately creating distance. "Tell our story. Make them believe." The creatures began moving toward him, ignoring me completely, drawn by whatever irresistible lure the mixture contained. Apanugpak stood his ground, torch raised defiantly as the horde converged. With a final look back, memorizing his courage, his sacrifice, I turned and ran northeast toward the river. Behind me, I heard his shotgun discharge twice, followed by sounds I choose not to describe in detail. I ran without looking back, honoring his last wish, each stride carrying me closer to potential salvation. The terrain grew steeper, vegetation thinning as I approached the riverbank. In summer, this would be a raging torrent from mountain snowmelt, but in deep winter, it ran sluggish and partially frozen, the center channel still flowing beneath ice shelves extending from both banks. I broke through the tree line onto the exposed riverbank, nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Behind me, the diversionary sounds had ceased. Returning silence meant only one thing: they would be coming for me next. At the river's edge, I knelt and broke open Apanugpak's leather pouch, spilling its contents into the flowing water as instructed. The mixture, herbs, minerals, and substances I couldn't identify, dissolved immediately, releasing a soft blue luminescence that spread outward with the current. Almost immediately, the air temperature rose slightly, as though some oppressive presence had withdrawn. I scanned the tree line, watching for pursuit, knowing it would come soon. I needed to cross the river to maximize the protective barrier Apanugpak had created, but the ice looked treacherous, too thin in places to support weight, unpredictably thick in others. With no choice and time running out, I began testing the ice shelf extending from my bank, searching for a path across. I had advanced perhaps 15 feet onto the frozen surface when I heard them, soft footfalls on snow, approaching from the forest I'd fled. I turned to see dark shapes emerging from the tree line, moving with predatory purpose directly toward me. Unlike before, they made no attempt to mimic human voices or appearances. Whatever Apanugpak had done seemed to have stripped away their pretenses. They approached as they truly were, entities that existed in the spaces between classification, neither fully animal nor anything else recognizable. The leading creature reached the riverbank and halted abruptly, as though encountering an invisible wall. It paced the shoreline, testing different access points, but wouldn't cross the boundary where water met land. The others joined it, spreading out along the bank, searching for weakness. The barrier held, just as Apanugpak had promised. I continued my cautious journey across the ice, mindful that falling into the frigid water would mean certain death from hypothermia long before rescue could arrive. Halfway across, a disturbing development, one entity, larger than the others, entered the water upstream. Though it shuddered violently upon contact, as if in great pain, it began wading toward the ice shelf where I navigated, apparently willing to suffer to reach its prey. I abandoned caution, moving faster across the increasingly thin ice. Cracks spread beneath my boots, the surface flexing alarmingly with each step. The pursuing entity gained ground, its movements becoming more fluid as it apparently adapted to the water's effect. 20 feet from the opposite shore, the ice gave way beneath me. I crashed through into chest-deep water, the cold so intense it felt like fire against my skin. I struggled toward the bank, Each movement, leaden as cold, rapidly sapped my strength. Behind me, the entity closed distance, now moving more easily through its element. I could feel its presence like a physical weight between my shoulder blades as I dragged myself onto the opposite bank, clothing frozen stiff, muscles beginning to fail. I crawled away from the water's edge, fumbling with numb fingers for the emergency flare in my pack. The entity reached the bank behind me, emerging partially from the water before encountering the same barrier that had stopped its companions. It writhed at the threshold, unwilling or unable to cross onto land, yet unwilling to retreat. With the last of my coordination, I ignited the flare, its harsh red light illuminating the scene in crimson. The creatures lined along the far bank, the one trapped at the water's edge, and beyond them, the distant outline of what remained of my cabin, now fully collapsed. In that moment of temporary safety, hypothermia began claiming my consciousness. My last thoughts before darkness took me were of Apanugpak, his sacrifice, his lifetime of hunting these entities, his final request that I survive to warn others. I awoke 3 days later in the regional hospital, having been spotted by a search and rescue helicopter responding to my cabin's automated distress beacon, triggered when interior temperatures dropped below survivable levels. The official report cited structure collapse due to snow load and my remarkable survival despite extreme conditions. No mention was made of multiple sets of unidentifiable tracks surrounding my cabin, no mention of the strange black substance found on the walls and floor, no mention of a second survivor or body. According to all official records, I had been alone. 6 months have passed since that solstice night. I've left the Park Service, unable to return to the wilderness I once loved. I've documented everything: photographs, journal entries, physical evidence preserved where possible. I've sent copies to colleagues, universities, even folklore researchers, always receiving the same polite dismissals or concerned suggestions to seek psychological help. Perhaps you'll dismiss this account as well. The delusions of a man who experienced trauma and isolation, hallucinations brought on by extreme conditions and stress. Perhaps that would be more comforting than the alternative. But as another winter approaches, I watch the news with growing dread. Reports of unusual animal behavior throughout the northern regions, unexplained disappearances in remote areas, strange tracks found near rural communities, patterns that most dismiss, but that I recognize with terrible clarity. They're migrating, spreading, growing bolder, and somewhere in the vast wilderness, Apanugpak's warning goes unheeded as darkness lengthens and the boundaries between worlds grow thin once more. I write this account not expecting belief, but as testament and warning. If you find yourself in the northern forests as winter deepens, if you hear familiar voices calling from the trees, if you glimpse movement that doesn't quite match any known predator, remember that some legends persist because they contain truth. And whatever you do, don't look directly at them. Don't answer when they call your name. I never wanted to be a park ranger at Glacier National Park. The isolation, the brutal winters, the vast stretches of wilderness that swallow people whole, none of it appealed to me. But when my grandmother Macawy passed away, leaving me her cabin on the eastern edge of the park, something inside me shifted. Her final letter said I needed to return to the land that birthed our ancestors. Macawy was half Blackfeet, and though I'd grown up disconnected from that heritage, her words haunted me. The cabin sat on a private in-holding, one of the few remaining within park boundaries. It was nestled between dense pine forest and a small mirror-like lake that reflected the mountains with perfect clarity on still days. When I arrived in early October, the aspen trees had already turned golden, their leaves quivering like nervous whispers in the wind. My name is Notau, fire, in Algonquin. My mother chose it to honor a distant branch of our family tree, though most people back in Chicago called me Nate. Park Service paperwork used my legal name, and when I introduced myself to my new supervisor, Ranger Davis, he raised an eyebrow. "Interesting name," he said, scanning my file. "Says here you've got a cabin inside the park?" "My grandmother's place, just inherited it." Davis peered at me over reading glasses. "Lucky. Those in-holdings are worth millions now, You planning to sell? I shook my head. It's been in the family for generations. He seemed satisfied with that. Well, we're short-staffed heading into winter. Most seasonal rangers clear out by November. You sure you want to stay through? That's the plan, I said, though uncertainty gnawed at me. I'd quit my marketing job in Chicago, loaded my Subaru with everything I owned, and driven west with only the vaguest notion of what awaited me. The training was brief. Davis showed me how to operate the radio systems, the emergency protocols, basic first aid beyond what I already knew, wildlife handling procedures. My patrol area would include the eastern wilderness section and several remote trails that few visitors used after the first snow. Mostly you'll be checking for illegal campers, assisting anyone who gets lost, and monitoring wildlife activity, Davis explained. Oh, and keeping an eye out for poachers. We've had issues recently. That first week, I settled into my grandmother's cabin. The interior smelled of cedar and pine smoke, with walls lined with bookshelves full of worn volumes, field guides, local history, and curiously, several books on Blackfeet and Algonquin folklore. One leather-bound journal caught my attention. Inside, I found McAwee's handwriting, documenting strange occurrences in the park stretching back decades. October 18th, 1983. Something took down an elk near Swift Current Creek. Rangers said it was a grizzly, but the tracks tell a different story. The prints changed halfway through the chase. The elders would say it's best not to speak of such things. I flipped through more pages, finding similar entries scattered throughout years of observations. The final entry, dated just 3 weeks before her death, sent a chill through me. They're growing hungrier as winter approaches. The old stories warned us. When the ice returns, so do they. I've left supplies in the root cellar. The door is iron for a reason. I closed the journal, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old woman whose mind had begun to wander. Still, that night, as wind howled through the pines and rattled the cabin's windows, I found myself checking that the doors were locked, the sturdy iron root cellar door included. My first solo patrol came after a week of shadowing Davis. The sky hung low and heavy with the promise of snow as I hiked up the ptarmigan trail, radio clipped to my belt. The late October air bit at my exposed skin, and my breath formed clouds that lingered before being whipped away by the wind. 4 miles in, I found the first sign something was wrong. A backpack sat abandoned beside the trail, its contents scattered as though someone had searched through it frantically. No blood, no signs of struggle, just personal belongings strewn across dead pine needles. I radioed it in. "Any ID?" Davis asked through static. I found a wallet. "Gregory Walsh, Montana driver's license. That's our missing hiker from yesterday. His wife reported he didn't return to their hotel." I gathered the belongings, methodically photographing the scene. Any chance he could have made it to one of the backcountry shelters? Possible. Nearest one's 3 miles up. Check it out, but be back before dark. As I continued up the trail, the forest grew denser, and shadows stretched longer despite it being midday. The temperature dropped noticeably. Something rustled in the underbrush to my left, and I froze, hand moving to the bear spray on my belt. A snowshoe hare burst from beneath a fallen log, its coat already turning white for winter. The shelter appeared after another hour of hiking. A simple, 3-sided wooden structure built into a hillside. From 50 yards away, I knew something was wrong. Dark smears marked the entrance, and the area around it showed signs of disturbance. Drawing closer, I recognized the smears as blood. Too much blood for someone to have survived losing it. Inside the shelter, a sleeping bag lay shredded, its stuffing scattered like entrails. A boot sat in the corner, still containing a sock. No foot. The radio crackled when I reported the scene. A search team would be assembled, but darkness was coming, and no one would reach me before nightfall. "Head back immediately," Davis ordered. "We'll send a full team at first light." I snapped photos, my hands steadier than I expected given what I was documenting. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Markings gouged into the shelter's wooden back wall. Not random claw marks, but deliberate symbols similar to those I'd seen in McAwee's books on Algonquin folklore. A warning, perhaps, or a message. Halfway back to the trailhead, snow began to fall in thick, wet flakes that clung to the pines and obscured the path. The light faded faster than it should have, and I flicked on my flashlight. Its beam seemed swallowed by the gathering gloom. A sound stopped me, a low, moaning call that wasn't quite human but couldn't be animal either. It echoed through the trees, impossible to pinpoint. Then, silence, heavy and oppressive. I quickened my pace, stumbling once on a root hidden beneath early snow. The forest had never felt so alive around me, so aware of my presence. When I reached my truck, I sat inside for several minutes, heater blasting, trying to slow my racing heart. That night, back at the cabin, I pulled out McAwee's journal again and found an entry from 30 years ago describing similar symbols found carved near the same shelter. Her words echoed in my mind as I drifted into uneasy sleep. They marked their hunting grounds. The Wendigo never forgets the taste of man. The search team found nothing the next day beyond what I'd already documented. No body, no additional blood trails leading away from the shelter. Gregory Walsh disappeared into the wilderness without a trace, joining the statistics of people who venture into national parks and never emerge. Sometimes nature just takes people, Davis said after the search was called off. Could have been a grizzly that dragged the remains away. I nodded, knowing what I'd seen didn't match any bear attack pattern from my training. The marks on the wall haunted me, deliberate symbols that spoke of intelligence behind the violence. November arrived with a vengeance. Snow fell in thick blankets that transformed the landscape into something alien and pristine. My patrols became shorter but more grueling, limited by daylight and weather conditions. The park emptied of visitors except for the occasional winter enthusiast, and even the ranger station operated with minimal staff. 2 weeks after the Walsh disappearance, I was checking the boundaries near my cabin when I found the first set of tracks. They began as deer prints in the snow, perfectly normal except for their depth. Whatever made them was heavier than any whitetail I'd encountered. 50 yards later, the tracks changed. The spacing widened, and the impression deepened. Most disturbing were the clear marks of what looked like humanoid toes replacing the hooves, as if the creature had transformed mid-stride. I photographed them meticulously, then followed their path. They led to the frozen edge of my grandmother's lake, where a perfect circle of ice had been broken and refrozen. Dark water gazed up like an eye from the white expanse. That evening, sitting before the fireplace in the cabin, I opened McAwee's journal again and read until I found what I was looking for. November 8th, 1992. The tracks always change. The old stories say they begin as something familiar to lure you forward. By the time you notice the difference, you've already been following too long. The Wendigo was human once. That's what makes it dangerous. It remembers how we think. I slammed the book shut and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. Folklore, superstition, nothing more. And yet the image of those tracks morphing from animal to something else lingered in my mind. The radio crackled around midnight, startling me from a doze in my chair. "Ranger Newtow, do you copy?" The voice was unfamiliar, distorted by static. I grabbed the handset. "This is Newtow. Who's calling?" "Hiker, lost, East Ridge Trail." The transmission broke apart, words fighting through waves of interference. I checked the clock. Midnight patrols weren't standard, especially in November conditions. "Identify yourself, over. Help. Need help." The voice sounded wrong somehow, the cadence mechanical, like someone mimicking human speech patterns they didn't quite understand. Protocol dictated I alert the main station before responding to any emergency call. I tried reaching Davis, but only static answered. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness. Through the window, the dark surface of the lake reflected moonlight like polished obsidian. The radio crackled again. "Coming to your cabin." Ice formed in my veins. I hadn't mentioned my location. Moving quickly, I extinguished the lights and checked the locks. The iron door to the root cellar drew my attention. My grandmother's words about supplies stored there nagged at me. I descended the narrow stairs, flashlight beam dancing over preserved food, tools, and camping equipment, organized with military precision. In the far corner stood a locked chest. The key hung on a nail beside it, wrapped in red cloth. Inside, I found items that made little sense together. Bundles of dried herbs tied with sinew, a horn-handled knife with symbols etched into the blade that matched those from the shelter wall, jars of unknown substances, and a bound manuscript titled simply, The Hunger. I took the manuscript upstairs and began reading by flashlight, hunched beneath a blanket to hide any light from the windows. The text described a creature born of human desperation and starvation, a spirit that possessed those who resorted to cannibalism during harsh winters. Once transformed, the Wendigo existed in a state of perpetual, insatiable hunger that grew with each feeding. Most disturbing were the descriptions of its ability to mimic human voices and appearance, almost perfectly, save for subtle wrongness in proportion and movement. A sound from outside interrupted my reading, the crunch of footsteps in snow, circling the cabin's perimeter. Too heavy for deer, too deliberate for bear. I extinguished my flashlight and moved silently to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. Moonlight illuminated a figure standing at the edge of the trees. Its proportions were wrong. Limbs too long, torso too narrow. It stood perfectly still, face tilted toward my cabin, antlers crowning its head like a grotesque corona. As I watched, it dropped to all fours in a motion no deer could make and disappeared into the forest. I didn't sleep that night. In the morning, I followed tracks that circled my cabin 7 times before leading back toward the lake. At the shoreline, they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had dissolved into the air. That afternoon, I returned to the ranger station to file my reports. Davis looked concerned when I described finding more abandoned equipment on the eastern trails. "We've had 3 missing persons reports in the past week," he said. "All solo hikers, experienced outdoorsmen." "In November?" I asked. "That's unusual." "Very. That's why I called in some help." He gestured to a woman organizing topographical maps at a nearby table. "This is Dr. Renee Locklear from the University of Montana, anthropologist specializing in indigenous folklore of the region." The woman glanced up, dark eyes assessing me sharply. "You're the ranger with the Blackfeet heritage?" "Partially," I admitted. "My grandmother was half Blackfeet." "Makawee," she said, not a question. "I corresponded with her for years about local legends. When I heard her grandson had taken a ranger position here, I wondered if it was coincidence." Something in her tone suggested she didn't believe in coincidences. "Dr. Locklear is helping us understand some unusual aspects of these disappearances," Davis explained uncomfortably. "Like the symbols carved at the sites," she added. "Algonquin protection wards, very specific to Wendigo lore." Davis cleared his throat. "We're considering all possibilities. Bears, mountain lions, even human predators." "And yet you called me," Locklear noted dryly. Turning to me, she asked, "Have you found her journal yet?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you know about that?" "Because Makawee documented everything, and she knew what was happening in these woods. She also knew it would return, and that blood calls to blood." Her gaze intensified. "The Wendigo legends aren't just stories, Ranger Newtow. Indigenous peoples didn't have the luxury of creating fiction about things that could kill them." That evening, returning to my cabin, I found fresh tracks in the new fallen snow, human boot prints approaching my door. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed, but centered on my kitchen table sat a small object that hadn't been there before. A carved bone whistle, yellowed with age, symbols matching those from the shelter wall etched into its surface. Beneath it lay a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "When it calls your name, don't answer. When it wears a familiar face, don't trust. Blood calls to blood." Outside, darkness fell like a curtain, and from somewhere across the frozen lake came a sound that might have been the wind, or might have been my name, called in a voice that almost, but not quite, sounded human. The 3rd disappearance happened when I was on patrol near Logan Pass. A cross-country skier vanished along a ridge typically considered safe, leaving behind only scattered equipment in those same disturbing tracks, beginning as human boot prints before elongating into something impossible. I took photographs and measurements, then radioed the details to Davis. The temperature hovered around 15 degrees, the sky a brilliant mocking blue above snow-laden pines. Everything appeared peaceful, except for the unnatural silence. No birds, no rustling creatures in the underbrush. The forest held its breath around the scene. When I returned to the ranger station that evening, Dr. Locklear waited with a grim expression. She'd spread topographical maps across a table, marking the locations of all 3 disappearances with red pins. "Look at the pattern," she said without preamble. The pins formed a rough circle, with my grandmother's cabin near the center. "You think this is targeted?" I asked, reluctant to voice the implication. "Wendigo folklore is consistent on one point," she replied. "They're territorial creatures with perfect memories, if your grandmother confronted one." "You can't seriously believe these disappearances are caused by a mythological creature," I interrupted. She raised an eyebrow. "What do you think is happening, Ranger?" I had no answer that fit the evidence. The transformed tracks, the deliberate symbols, the voice on the radio that knew where I lived, none of it aligned with natural predator behavior or human criminal activity. Davis entered, looking exhausted. "Search teams found nothing new. We're suspending operations until morning." "You need to close the eastern section of the park," Locklear insisted. "On what grounds? Mysterious footprints and Native American ghost stories?" Davis shook his head. "The superintendent would laugh me out of office." "People are dying," she pressed. "We have missing hikers," he corrected. "No bodies, no confirmed deaths." I thought of the boot I'd found at the first scene, still containing a sock. "I need to check something in my grandmother's journal," I said suddenly. "There might be precedent for this pattern." Back at the cabin, I pored over McAwee's writings until I found what I was looking for. Entries from the winter of 1978 to 79, describing 5 disappearances in almost identical locations to our current cases. February 3, 1979. The Park Service blames the deaths on a rogue grizzly, despite knowing bears hibernate this time of year. The marks I found tell the truth. I've left offerings at the boundary stones. Blood calls to blood. My father taught me this. What hunts these woods remembers those who've challenged it before. A knock at the door startled me. Through the window, I saw Dr. Locklear standing on my porch, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "I need to show you something," she said when I opened the door. "Something your grandmother gave me for safekeeping." From her bag, she produced a wrapped bundle. Inside lay an ancient-looking knife with a handle fashioned from antler, its blade darkened with age. The same symbols from the shelter walls and the bone whistle had been etched into the metal. "This is one of only 3 Wendigo blades known to exist," she explained. "The metal was supposedly tempered with human blood, a hunter who sacrificed himself to save his village." "Why would my grandmother have this?" "Because she used it. Winter of 79. She tracked what was hunting in these woods and wounded it badly enough that it retreated." Locklear's expression hardened. "But Wendigos don't die easily. They go dormant, healing, waiting. Your grandmother knew it would return someday, which is why she prepared you." "Prepared me? I never even met her until I was a teenager." "And yet here you are in her cabin with her journal, following the same paths." She gestured to the horn-handled knife I'd found in the root cellar, a modern twin to the ancient blade she'd brought. "She left you everything you need." I was about to respond when the radio crackled to life. "Notau, help me." The voice was Davis's, strained with pain or fear. I grabbed the handset. "Davis, what's your location?" "Near the old fire tower. Injured. Something's out here." Locklear seized my arm. "Don't go. That's not him." I stared at her. "How can you be sure?" "Because I just left Davis at the station 20 minutes ago." Her grip tightened. "It's learning, using voices you trust." The radio crackled again. This time the voice was different, a perfect mimicry of my own. "Nutau, come find me." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the winter air. I set the radio down slowly. "How do we stop it?" I asked. "Your grandmother wounded it with the blade but didn't kill it. According to the old stories, you need to pierce its heart and then burn the remains." She hesitated. "There's something else. Wendigos are drawn to their own kind." "What does that mean?" "It means there's a reason it's circling your cabin, focusing its hunt around you." Her eyes met mine. "Blood calls to blood, Ranger. Your grandmother challenged it, marked it. Now it wants revenge, and it sees that blood in you." That night, We reinforced the cabin's defenses. Salt across thresholds. Locklear insisted it helped. Symbols carved into doorframes, both knives placed strategically. I wondered if we looked like lunatics, preparing for a monster from folklore rather than flesh and blood predators. Around midnight, the temperature plummeted unnaturally. Frost formed on the inside of the windows, spiraling in patterns that resembled the symbols from Macawee's journal. The fire in the hearth dimmed despite the logs I added, as if something were sucking the warmth from the room. "It's testing the boundaries," Locklear whispered. Outside, something circled the cabin, its footsteps crunching deliberately in the snow, pausing at each window as if peering inside. The radio on the table came to life without being activated, cycling through voices I recognized. Davis, then the missing hikers based on recordings from their families' pleas, then my own voice again, calling my name. The night stretched endlessly, each minute crawling by in tense silence, broken only by the thing outside, testing our defenses, trying doors and windows, scraping at walls. Near dawn, the assault suddenly ceased. The unnatural cold lingered, but the presence withdrew. When morning light finally broke through the frost-covered windows, we ventured outside to find the tracks. They circled the cabin dozens of times, occasionally approaching doors or windows before retreating. At the lake's edge, they were joined by older tracks, multiple sets, some fresh, some partially filled with snow. "It's bringing them here," I realized aloud. "The missing people," Locklear nodded grimly. "Not people anymore. When a Wendigo feeds, it doesn't just take life, it transforms. The victims become like it, driven by the same hunger." I studied the frozen surface of the lake. There's something under there. The circle of broken and refrozen ice I'd noticed days earlier had expanded, now a dark eye about 12 feet in diameter staring up from the white expanse. Something about its perfect roundness suggested deliberate creation, rather than natural thawing. "We need to see what's down there," I said. "No," Locklear replied firmly. "That's exactly what it wants, to separate us, lure us into vulnerable positions." But I couldn't shake the feeling that answers lay beneath that dark surface. After reporting to the ranger station, where Davis confirmed he'd been there all night, never making the radio call I'd heard, I returned to the cabin and gathered equipment. Rope, ice axe, underwater flashlight, dry suit I used for summer lake surveys. Locklear argued vehemently against my plan, but finally relented on the condition that she would be my anchor on shore, ready to pull me out at the first sign of trouble. The ice was thick around the edges of the hole, at least 8 inches, making its perfectly circular shape all the more unsettling. Who or what had the strength to cut through such solid ice with such precision? I secured the rope harness around my chest and waist, double-checking the knots while Locklear prepared the anchor system on shore. The dry suit would protect against hypothermia, but not for long in these temperatures. 15 minutes maximum, she instructed. 3 tugs on the rope means pull you out immediately. I nodded, heart pounding as I approached the edge of the ice hole. The water below appeared unnaturally dark, swallowing my flashlight beam rather than reflecting it. With a deep breath, I lowered myself into the frigid water. The cold attacked despite the dry suit, seeming to penetrate directly to my bones. I swept the flashlight beam through murky darkness, struggling to orient myself. Beneath me, the lake bottom should have been visible at about 20 feet, but I saw only impenetrable blackness. Something glinted about 15 feet down. I dove deeper, the rope trailing behind me like an umbilical cord to the surface world. As I approached, the object took shape, a metal box, the kind used for waterproof storage, resting on what appeared to be a natural underwater shelf. I reached for it, fingers nearly brushing its surface, when movement caught the corner of my eye, something large and pale sliding through the water just beyond my flashlight beam. I froze, pulse hammering in my ears. The shape didn't approach, remaining just at the periphery of visibility. Was it human? Animal? The proportions seemed wrong for either, elongated and gaunt. As I watched, it circled, always keeping the same distance, always just beyond clear sight. I grabbed the box and tugged the rope 3 times in rapid succession. The response was immediate, a sharp pull dragging me toward the surface. As I ascended, The pale shape darted forward with impossible speed. Cold fingers, too long, too thin to be human, brushed against my ankle before I broke the surface, gasping and scrambling onto solid ice. Locklear helped drag me fully clear, her face tense with concentration as she pulled me away from the hole. Only when we'd reached shore did she speak. "Did you see it?" I nodded, unable to form words through chattering teeth. The metal box sat beside me, its surface covered in a thin film of ice already forming in the frigid air. Inside the cabin, warmed by fresh logs on the fire and wrapped in blankets, I finally examined our find. The box's lock had corroded underwater, breaking easily with minimal force. Inside, protected by the watertight seal, we found a leather-bound book similar to McAwee's journal but far older, its pages yellow with age. The text inside was written in a language I didn't recognize, but Locklear inhaled sharply when she saw it. "This is Algonquin, ancient dialect," she said. "Where was this hidden?" "Underwater shelf, about 15 feet down." I hesitated. Something was down there with it, watching, guarding maybe. She began carefully translating sections, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "This belonged to a medicine man who first documented Wendigo encounters in this region," she explained. According to this, the creature was once a tribal chief who resorted to cannibalism during a brutal winter, then developed a taste for it. His transformation was the first. He created others. How was he stopped? He wasn't. The tribe abandoned their traditional hunting grounds to escape him. She turned more pages. But there's something here about a ritual, a way to draw the Wendigo to a specific location and trap it. Outside, the short winter day was already fading into dusk. From somewhere in the darkening forest came a sound that raised the hair on my neck. A perfect imitation of my grandmother's voice, calling my name. Morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and news of another disappearance, a park maintenance worker who'd been clearing access roads near the eastern boundary. His snowplow was found still running, driver's door open, a single set of tracks leading from the vehicle into the woods. Davis looked haggard when I reported to the station, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "The superintendent is finally taking this seriously," he said. "They're closing the eastern section effective immediately and bringing in wildlife experts from Missoula." "Wildlife experts won't help," I told him, then hesitated. How could I explain what Locklear and I had discovered? That something ancient and hungry was stalking the park, something that defied scientific classification. "I know," Davis admitted, surprising me. "I've worked these woods for 22 years. Whatever's out there isn't like anything I've encountered before." He rubbed his face. "Your grandmother warned me, you know, back in '79 after they blamed the deaths on a rogue bear. Said something would return one day, and when it did, I should listen to her blood. You believe her? I didn't then. Now?" He gestured to the map, where 5 red pins marked the disappearances, forming a tightening circle around my cabin. I don't know what I believe anymore. When I returned to the cabin, Locklear had translated more of the ancient text. The ritual described in the book required specific components. A circle drawn with ash from sacred wood, offerings of personal significance, and most troublingly, blood from someone connected to the Wendigo, either a previous victim or someone who had encountered it before. "Your grandmother wounded it," Locklear reminded me. "That created a connection." "She's dead," I pointed out, "but you carry her blood." Her expression was solemn. "The ritual needs bait, Nutau. Someone the Wendigo wants badly enough to approach despite knowing it might be a trap." The implication hung heavy between us. I would be the bait. We spent the day preparing. The ritual would need to be performed at a place of significance. The underwater shelf where the book had been hidden seemed the obvious choice. According to the text, Wendigos were most vulnerable during the darkest phase of the moon, which coincided with that very night. As dusk approached, we gathered what we needed. Ash from cedar burned in my grandmother's fireplace, the ancient knife Locklear had brought, a vial for my blood, and items from each of the missing persons that had been collected as evidence: a watch, a bootlace, a keychain, a glove, a park service badge. Davis arrived as we were loading the final supplies, his truck headlights cutting through thickening darkness. I should have reported you both for interfering with an investigation, he said, stepping onto the porch. Instead, I'm here to help. Locklear eyed him cautiously. Why the change of heart? Because I found these in the maintenance shed. He held out a manila envelope. Inside were photographs from 1979, the previous disappearances McAwee had documented in her journal. One image showed a tree marked with the same symbols we'd found at the shelter. Another showed tracks in snow, transitioning from human to something else. The official report blamed a bear, Davis continued. But these were hidden in a locked cabinet, with a note saying they should be destroyed. Your grandmother must have kept them as evidence. The plan crystallized quickly. Davis would maintain a perimeter with his rifle loaded with special rounds Locklear had prepared. Bullets carved with the same symbols as the knife blades and filled with a mixture of herbs and ash. Locklear would conduct the ritual on the lakeshore while I ventured onto the ice to serve as bait. Night fell completely as we made final preparations. The moon, just past new, provided almost no light, leaving us dependent on headlamps and flashlights. The temperature had plummeted to well below zero, making the air painful to breathe. We positioned ourselves around the frozen lake, Davis concealed at the tree line with his rifle, Locklear at the shoreline preparing the ritual circle, and me walking slowly toward the center where the large hole in the ice waited like a portal to another world. The ice creaked beneath my feet but held secure. I carried both knives, the ancient one and its modern twin, secured at my belt. Every few steps I paused to listen. The forest had gone completely silent, not even the whisper of wind disturbing the oppressive stillness. 20 feet from the ice hole, I stopped and turned slowly in a complete circle, scanning the darkness beyond my light beam. Nothing moved on the frozen expanse, yet I felt watched from all directions. It's here, I called back to Locklear. I can feel it. She nodded, completing the ash circle and placing the personal items of the missing at cardinal points. We need your blood now. I removed my glove and drew the modern knife across my palm, letting drops fall into the small vial Locklear had prepared. The wound stung viciously in the cold air. As she added my blood to the ritual components, a sound echoed across the lake. My name, called in my grandmother's voice, seeming to emanate from the ice hole itself. Don't answer, Locklear warned, no matter what voices you hear. The voices multiplied, rising from the forest and the ice and the dark water below, each missing person calling out, pleading for help, crying in pain. Among them, my grandmother's voice grew strongest, most insistent. No, Tao, they've taken me down here. Help me, grandson. I forced myself to focus on Locklear as she began reciting words from the ancient text, her voice carrying through the frigid air. The ritual had begun. The ice beneath my feet vibrated subtly, then more intensely. Cracks formed around the central hole, spreading outward like a spider web. I backed away, but the fractures followed my movements as if deliberately tracking me. From the hole, something emerged, not rising from the water, but seeming to form from it, ice crystallizing into a humanoid shape that grew taller and more defined with each second. It took form before my eyes, gaunt limbs too long for its torso, fingers extending into claw-like points, a head crowned with ice formations resembling antlers. Its face was the most disturbing aspect, features almost human, but stretched and distorted, mouth extending too wide across its face, eyes sunken and glowing with pale blue light. As it fully materialized, I recognized elements of each missing person in its appearance. A Park Service badge embedded in its chest, a glove seemingly melded to one elongated hand, a boot forming part of one misshapen foot. Behind it, more figures began emerging from the water, smaller versions of the first, their features blending human and animal aspects in nauseating combinations. The missing people transformed into Wendigo spawn. Keep it in the circle, Locklear shouted. The primary Wendigo took a step toward me, ice cracking beneath its impossible weight. Its mouth opened, wider than any human mouth could, and spoke with my grandmother's voice. Blood calls to blood. You came back to me. I held my ground, both knives now drawn. You're not her. No, but I remember her dot. The creature's head tilted at an impossible angle. She marked me, as I will mark you. It lunged forward with shocking speed. I ducked beneath elongated arms, slashing upward with the ancient knife. The blade connected, drawing a sound like cracking ice from the creature. Where I cut, blue-black liquid oozed like frozen sap. The smaller wendigos spread out, forming a circle that cut off my retreat to shore. From the tree line came the crack of Davis's rifle. One of the creatures staggered but didn't fall. Locklear's voice rose in volume, the ritual words coming faster now. The ash circle on the shore began to glow with subtle blue light that matched the wendigo's eyes. The primary creature recovered quickly from my strike, moving with unnatural grace across the fractured ice. It spoke again, but now in a cacophony of voices, all the missing persons at once. Join us. The hunger never ends, but it becomes everything. I feinted left, then dodged right, trying to lead it toward Locklear's ritual circle. It followed, but cautiously, seeming aware of the trap. You've been here before, I called to it, remembering McAwee's journal. You know this place, this lake. I know all who have tasted flesh in these mountains. Your grandmother, your ancestors, you. The accusation struck like a physical blow. I've never... The hunger is in your blood, dormant, waiting. The creature's mouth stretched in a grotesque approximation of a smile. Why do you think you came here? I backed toward shore, keeping both knives raised. The ice continued fracturing beneath us, water beginning to seep through the cracks. The smaller wendigos kept pace, maintaining their circle. Davis's rifle sounded again and again. 2 more creatures stumbled but continued advancing. The special ammunition wounded them but couldn't kill. Feet from shore. 8. Locklear's chanting reached a crescendo, the ritual circle pulsing with brighter light. The primary wendigo suddenly stopped, head tilting as it assessed the glowing circle. It knew the trap now. With a sound like shattering ice, it changed direction, lunging not for me but for Locklear. I reacted without thinking, throwing myself between them. Its claws tore through my jacket and into my shoulder, cold burning worse than fire. We crashed to the ice at the shoreline, half in Locklear's circle. The creature pinned me, face inches from mine, breath like the air from a slaughterhouse freezer. Its clawed hand raised for a killing blow, and froze as Locklear completed the final words of the ritual. The circle flared brilliant blue. The wendigo shrieked, a sound of rage and pain that shattered ice across the lake. The smaller creatures converged, howling in similar agony. The heart, Locklear shouted. Strike the heart now. With my last strength, I drove both knives into the creature's chest, the ancient blade and its modern twin, one in each hand. The wendigo convulsed, its body beginning to fracture like breaking ice, blue-black liquid pouring from the wounds and sizzling where it touched the ritual circle. Its final words came in my grandmother's voice, but distorted, breaking apart like its body. Blood calls to blood. The creature collapsed inward, imploding rather than falling, its mass seeming to fold into the ritual circle which absorbed it like water into sand. The smaller wendigos followed, drawn irresistibly into the same vortex of energy, shrieking as they dissolved. In seconds, all were gone, consumed by whatever power Locklear had channeled. The glowing circle faded slowly, leaving only a scorched ring in the snow and ice. Davis reached us first, helping me to my feet. The wound in my shoulder burned with unnatural cold, the flesh around it blackening with frostbite. "Is it over?" he asked. Locklear collected the items from the ritual, now transformed, blackened as if burned. For now. But the hunger never truly dies, it just waits. I looked at the frozen lake, now cracked and broken where the wendigos had emerged. Beneath the fractured surface, shadows moved in the depths, too distant to see clearly, but present nonetheless. "We need to seal the lake," I said, remembering my grandmother's iron root cellar door. "All of it. This is where they come through." As dawn broke over the mountains, casting pink light across the shattered ice, I understood why my grandmother had left me the cabin, the journal, the weapons, why blood calls to blood. This wasn't just inheritance, it was responsibility. The wendigo was gone, but its hunger remained, dormant beneath the frozen surface of these mountains. And someone needed to stand guard when winter returned. Spring came late to Glacier National Park. Snow lingered in shadowed valleys into May, and ice held stubbornly to the surface of higher lakes. My grandmother's lake was the last to thaw, its surface remaining solid weeks after others had surrendered to warming temperatures. The official report listed all 5 missing persons as presumed dead, victims of a territorial predator that had subsequently been neutralized through Joint Park Service and local expert intervention. Davis made sure Locklear received consulting fees for her assistance, though the true nature of what we'd encountered never appeared in official documentation. The wound in my shoulder healed slowly, leaving a handprint-shaped scar that ached when temperatures dropped. Locklear said this was to be expected. Wendigo touch carried lasting cold that never completely faded, a reminder. I stayed on as a permanent ranger, moving into my grandmother's cabin permanently. The books that had seemed like folklore collections now served as field guides for my real work, monitoring the boundaries between our world and whatever lay beneath the lake's surface. We reinforced those boundaries throughout spring and summer, iron markers embedded at regular intervals around the lakeshore, each carved with protection symbols. A new dock, built with specially treated wood, extending over the spot where the ice hole had formed. Below it, underwater cameras monitored the shelf where we'd found the ancient text. The cameras showed nothing unusual through spring and summer, but as autumn painted the aspen trees gold once more, strange disturbances began appearing on the recordings. Shadow movements at the edge of visibility, brief temperature fluctuations that froze the water around the cameras before quickly dissipating. "It's testing the boundaries," Locklear explained during one of her regular visits. She'd taken a sabbatical from the university to document what we'd learned, creating a modern companion to the ancient text. The Wendigo itself is gone, but its influence remains. The hunger lingers. I understood this all too well. Since that night on the ice, my dreams had changed. Visions of running through snow-laden forests on limbs too long for my body, pursuing warmth and sustenance that remained eternally just beyond reach. I would wake gasping, the scar on my shoulder burning with cold. Locklear noticed my deterioration. "You need to tell me if it's getting worse," she insisted. "The connection works both ways. Blood calls to blood, remember?" "I'm fine," I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. On the anniversary of my arrival at the park, one full cycle of seasons, I hiked to the shelter where I'd found the first signs of the Wendigo. The bloodstains had long since weathered away, but the symbols remained carved into the back wall. I traced them with my fingers, feeling each groove and understanding their meaning now. Warnings, not threats. Barriers between worlds. That night, alone in my grandmother's cabin, my cabin now, I opened her journal to the final pages I hadn't yet read. Her handwriting grew shakier in these entries, the words more urgent. October 15th, 2023. It's returning. I feel it beneath the ice, stirring from dormancy. My time is ending, but the vigil must continue. Blood calls to blood. No Tao will come when the signs appear. He carries the same awareness in his veins, though he doesn't know it yet. The hunger can be contained, but never destroyed. This is our burden to bear. I closed the book and moved to the window overlooking the lake. The surface reflected moonlight, tranquil and innocent. Beneath that beauty, I knew, something waited, hibernating perhaps, but never truly gone. The radio on my table crackled suddenly, though it wasn't turned on. Through static, a voice that might have been my grandmother's whispered my name. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the locks, tested the iron reinforcements we'd installed, and placed both knives, ancient and modern, beside my bed. The Wendigo would return when winter sealed the mountains in ice once more, and I would be waiting, as my grandmother had waited before me, and her ancestors before her. Blood calls to blood. The hunger never ends, but neither does the vigil against it. My nighttime patrols through the foggy park became increasingly terrifying. I never planned on becoming a park ranger at Glacier National Park. 6 months ago, I was working in corporate finance in Seattle, drowning in spreadsheets and artificial office lighting. My therapist called it burnout. I called it a slow death. When the job listing appeared in my LinkedIn feed, seasonal ranger position, Glacier National Park, Montana, something deep inside me stirred. Perhaps it was nostalgia for the childhood camping trips with my father before he passed, or maybe just desperation for escape. Whatever it was, I applied that night. 3 weeks later, I arrived at the eastern edge of the park, at a remote ranger station called Akicheta Outpost, named after a Blackfeet warrior who, according to local lore, vanished in these mountains 2 centuries ago while pursuing something neither man nor beast. The station supervisor, Rivera, a weathered woman with eyes that had seen too much wilderness, handed me my uniform with a strange hesitation. "Northridge Cabin is the only one available," she said, not quite meeting my gaze. "It's isolated, 20 minutes from the main road, but the view of Lake Kintla is worth it." I didn't mind isolation. That was the point, wasn't it? To escape humanity for a while. "One more thing," Rivera added as I turned to leave. "Stay on marked trails during your patrols, even during daylight, especially after dark." I laughed politely. "Bears, I'm guessing?" Her expression remained flat, among other things. Northridge Cabin exceeded my expectations. Rustic cedar exterior, solar panels, a wood stove, and panoramic windows overlooking pristine Lake Kintla. The cabin sat nestled among towering pines, their shadows creating intricate patterns across the woodland floor. As I unpacked, I discovered a leather-bound journal wedged behind the dresser. The first entry, dated May 2023, read, "Something watches from the trees." The rest of the pages had been torn out. My training lasted 2 weeks. Wildlife encounters, search and rescue protocols, visitor management. I learned the park's 1,583 square miles of wilderness like the back of my hand. My primary patrol sector encompassed the northern trails, remote regions rarely visited except by the most experienced hikers. Fellow rangers warned me about standard dangers, grizzlies, sudden weather changes, lost hikers, but occasionally conversations would die when I approached. Twice I overheard mention of the winter incidents, though no one elaborated when I inquired. My first solo patrol happened on a crisp autumn day. The aspens blazed gold against the evergreens, and the mountains stood sentinel against a cloudless sky. I felt alive, purposeful. That night I wrote in my own journal, "I made the right choice coming here. If only I'd known what waited in the darkness." My night patrols began in my 4th week. The first few were uneventful. Just the whisper of wind through pines and occasional rustling of nocturnal animals. I checked the remote cameras, walked the designated trails with my flashlight cutting through the mist, and returned to my cabin by dawn. Then came the night of the first snowfall. 3 inches of powder transformed the landscape into something ethereal. My boots crunched rhythmically as I made my way along Trail 8, my breath clouding before me. At the 5-mile marker, I noticed something unusual. A single track of footprints crossing the trail and continuing deeper into the woods. Human footprints, too large for a child but oddly narrow, and far from any authorized camping area. Protocol dictated I report and track potential lost hikers. I radioed in my position and followed the prints. They led me half a mile off trail to an ancient pine, its trunk nearly 8 feet in diameter. The footprints circled the tree once, twice, then simply stopped. I scanned the area with my flashlight, the beam catching swirling snowflakes. "Hello?" My voice sounded small against the vastness. "Park Service, do you need assistance?" Something shifted in the branches above, not the wind, something deliberate. I aimed my light upward, seeing nothing but snow-laden boughs. Then a sound that wasn't quite animal, wasn't quite human, a rhythmic clicking, like bone against bone. My radio crackled. "Base to Ranger 17, check in, please." When I responded, my voice was steady despite my racing heart. "Ranger 17 here, false alarm, returning to patrol route." As I turned to leave, my light caught something carved into the tree's bark at eye level. Fresh cuts that hadn't been there moments before. Hungry. I convinced myself it was a prank by hikers. Had to be. I photographed it, reported it as vandalism, and continued my rounds. But that night, lying in bed at the cabin, I heard that clicking sound again, distant but unmistakable through my partially open window. It continued for hours, moving through the forest, circling closer, then retreating. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just branches rubbing together in the wind. The alternative was unthinkable. 2 nights later, I found the first abandoned backpack on Trail 10. Inside, standard hiking gear, a half-eaten energy bar, a camera with no photos, and a journal containing a single entry. It's following us, not like a predator follows prey, like a child follows an interesting bug. No missing persons had been reported. When I brought the pack to Rivera, she locked it away without logging it into evidence. "Hikers abandon gear all the time," she said dismissively. "Shouldn't we file a report?" I pressed. She fixed me with that same flat stare. "Would you like a different patrol route? Perhaps daylight shifts only?" I declined. Whatever was happening, I needed to understand it. As October deepened, so did my unease. Each night, patrol revealed new oddities. Trees scored with strange markings, small animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns, and twice more, those peculiar footprints that started and stopped impossibly. The clicking sounds became my constant companion in the darkness, sometimes so close I could feel the vibration in my chest, other times distant like an echo from another valley. My dreams filled with shadowy figures standing motionless among trees, watching me with hungry patience. I'd wake gasping, convinced something was crouched at the foot of my bed, only to find nothing but moonlight painting patterns across my floor. Still, I stayed. Something about this wilderness had its hooks in me now. I needed answers more than I needed comfort. Little did I know that the true terror had not yet begun. The first substantial snowfall came in mid-November, burying Glacier Park under 2 feet of pristine white. The tourists had long since departed, leaving only the permanent rangers and seasonal staff like myself to witness the transformation. Lake Kintla froze over, and the mountains loomed larger somehow, as if drawing closer in the cold. My patrol routes were shortened due to impassable conditions, but Rivera insisted we maintain surveillance of the northern trails. "Winter is when we need to be most vigilant," she said during a staff meeting, her eyes briefly flickering to mine. "Vigilant for what exactly?" I asked. The room fell silent. Only Ranger Dawson, an older man with a silver beard who rarely spoke, answered. "Hungry things," he muttered, then excused himself. That night, I found my first tree ladder. It appeared on Trail 4, near the abandoned fire lookout. A crude ladder fashioned from branches tied with what looked like sinew, leaning against a towering pine. It reached at least 30 feet up, disappearing into the dense canopy. The snow around it was pristine and untouched, as if the ladder had materialized from thin air. I photographed it, circled it twice, and found no tracks besides my own. The construction was primitive yet effective, each rung tested solid when I tugged. Against protocol and better judgment, I began to climb. The wood was ice-cold beneath my gloves, but not frozen. Somehow it felt warm, almost alive. 10 feet up, I noticed carvings on the trunk, similar to what I'd seen before, but older, weathered by years or decades. Ascend to feed it. 20 feet up, the clicking began, not from above or below, but from inside the tree itself, as if something moved within the wood. I froze, listening. With each click, the ladder seemed to vibrate subtly against my hands. A sudden crack above made me look up. Through gaps in the branches, something moved. A pale, emaciated form, more elongated than a human should be, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. I caught only a glimpse before it retreated higher, but it was enough to send me scrambling down. My boots had barely touched snow when my radio burst to life. All Rangers returned to base immediately. Code Yellow. Code Yellow meant dangerous wildlife activity. I hesitated, looking back at the ladder. Protocol demanded I report the structure, but something deeper warned against it. Instead, I marked the GPS coordinates in my personal phone and hurried back. At base, Rangers had gathered around a map where Rivera was marking locations with red pins. 3 separate hikers reported the same thing, she explained. A man walking on all fours along the eastern ridge, moving faster than humanly possible through deep snow. In this weather? Someone asked. No one could survive exposure like that. Rivera's expression darkened. Exactly. Over the next week, strange incidents multiplied. Motion sensors triggered without visual confirmation. Trail cameras captured only static when they should have shown wildlife. 2 more backpacks appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. their contents untouched except for missing food. And the ladders. Always the ladders. I found 3 more during my patrols, each in locations impossible to reach without being seen, each with no surrounding tracks. I reported none of them. Instead, I began researching. The small ranger station library contained local history, and I discovered mentions of Akacheta's disappearance, how the Blackfeet warrior had pursued what local stories called the winter hunger that walks like a man into these same mountains. His final message, delivered by a half-frozen companion, warned of creatures that climb between worlds using trees as doorways. Local newspaper archives revealed a pattern. Every decade or so, a cluster of disappearances in the northern section of what would become Glacier National Park. The most recent had been in 2018, 3 backpackers who vanished during an early winter storm. Search parties found only a crude ladder leading into the canopy and a journal containing increasingly paranoid entries about being watched from above. One night in early December, I woke to scratching at my cabin window. Fine lines appeared in the frost, forming words I couldn't quite read from my bed. Heart pounding, I approached slowly, watching as invisible fingers etched into the delicate ice crystals. You climb, you see, you become. The scratching continued until the entire window was covered with the same message repeated dozens of times. Then silence. Dawn revealed no tracks in the snow outside, no evidence anyone had been there. That same day, Ranger Dawson announced his retirement, effective immediately. When I helped him load his truck, he pressed a small leather pouch into my hand. "Blackfeet protection," he murmured. "My grandmother made it. Hang it above your bed. Don't take it down for any reason, especially if you hear voices calling your name." I started to question him, but he cut me off. The Wendigo doesn't just eat flesh, it eats will. Curiosity. It makes you hunger to know it, to find it, to join it. That's how it begins. "How what begins?" I asked. His eyes, suddenly clear and afraid, met mine. The transformation. He drove away that afternoon in the middle of a snowstorm. That night, my patrol took me past the first ladder I'd found. It had grown taller somehow, extending beyond where my flashlight could reach. The carvings had changed too, almost ready. As I stood contemplating what this meant, my radio produced only static, and my flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries. The forest fell preternaturally silent. No wind, no animals, not even the sound of falling snow. Then came the clicking, surrounding me from all directions, perfectly synchronized, like a language I almost understood. Between the rhythmic sounds, I heard what seemed like my name, whispered just beneath comprehension. Something pale moved between distant trees. Not one figure, but many, their elongated forms gliding through the darkness with impossible grace. They maintained their distance, a rough circle with me at its center, watching. My training evaporated. I ran, stumbling through snowdrifts, heading instinctively toward my cabin. The clicking followed, always maintaining the same distance, never closing in but never falling behind. Just as Lake Kintla came into view, the sounds ceased abruptly. I burst through my cabin door, locked it, and hung Dawson's leather pouch above my bed with shaking hands. Inside my fireplace, embers glowed despite no fire having been lit before my departure. On my kitchen table sat a small pyramid of bones, too small for deer or elk, too large for squirrels or marmots. Human finger bones arranged precisely, topped with a yellowed tooth. I should have left immediately. Any sane person would have. Instead, I photographed everything, packed essential supplies, and barricaded my bedroom door. That night, something circled my cabin for hours, its footsteps crunching in snow, occasionally testing windows and doors with gentle pressure. Just before dawn, it spoke. A voice like wind through dead leaves. "Hunger teaches patience. We have waited centuries. We can wait for you." When morning broke, I found 5 ladders surrounding my cabin, each pointing toward my bedroom window, each carved with a single word that together read, "The climb calls you home." December brought the darkness. At this latitude, daylight dwindled to precious few hours, and storms frequently obscured even those brief moments of sun. The park transformed into a realm of shadows and whispering snow, the mountains disappearing for days behind curtains of white. I'd taken to sleeping in 2-hour increments, afraid to surrender fully to unconsciousness. Dark circles formed beneath my eyes, and fellow rangers commented on my haggard appearance. I deflected their concerns with mentions of insomnia. The truth, that something watched me through my windows every night, that ladders continued appearing around my cabin with increasing frequency, that the clicking sounds had begun to form patterns I was horrifyingly close to understanding, seemed impossible to share. Rivera assigned me exclusively to daylight patrols, though she never explained why. The northern trails are off-limits after 3 p.m., she instructed. No exceptions. I obeyed during official hours, but my growing obsession drove me to conduct my own patrols after dark, unauthorized and alone, searching for answers I both craved and dreaded. The day that changed everything began ordinarily enough. I checked the remote cameras along Trail 6, replaced weather monitoring equipment, and assisted a research team collecting snowpack data. As 3 p.m. approached, the researchers departed, leaving me alone at the 5-mile marker as fat snowflakes began falling. I should have turned back. Instead, I continued north, toward where I'd found the first ladder weeks before. The storm intensified rapidly, visibility dropping to mere feet, the world reduced to swirling white. Navigation became impossible, even with GPS that kept losing signal. By nightfall, I was officially lost. My radio produced only static, my flashlight beam couldn't penetrate the blizzard, and the temperature plummeted to dangerous levels. Hypothermia would kill me within hours without shelter. That's when I found the cave. It appeared suddenly through the whiteout, a dark opening in a rock face I didn't recognize from any park map. Desperate, I stumbled inside. The entrance was narrow but opened into a spacious interior where the howling wind couldn't reach. My flashlight revealed ancient pictographs covering the walls, crude human figures with elongated limbs, trees with ladder-like marks, and what appeared to be hunting scenes, though it wasn't clear which were the hunters and which the hunted. At the cave's center stood a stone cairn approximately 4 feet tall. Atop it rested a bundle wrapped in what looked like animal hide, yellowed with age. Against all protocol and common sense, I approached and unwrapped it. Inside, a journal bound in leather so old it crumbled at my touch. The first legible page contained a single sentence in faded ink. They are not what they appear to be. The handwriting matched the journal I'd found in my cabin months ago. As I turned pages carefully, I pieced together a fragmented narrative. The journal belonged to a ranger from 1978, who had investigated disappearances similar to those I'd been researching. He had followed the ladders, climbed high into the canopy, and witnessed something that broke his understanding of reality. The final pages contained increasingly frantic entries. They exist between states, not alive as we understand it, not dead, but hungry always. They require vessels. They call it transcendence. The ladders are invitations. The clicking is language. The hunger is transformation. I can feel myself changing. My fingers elongate when I sleep. Food tastes like ash. Only the thought of the climb brings saliva to my mouth. The final entry, dated December 21st, 1978, read simply, "Winter solstice, the longest night. They come for those who've shown interest." I've hidden this record for whoever follows. If you're reading this, they're already watching you. They've been watching me climb their ladders, test their thresholds. Tonight I become. May whatever God exists forgive me. The journal ended there. With shaking hands, I rewrapped it and backed away from the cairn, suddenly aware of how quiet the cave had become. The storm outside had ceased abruptly, unnaturally. In that silence, the clicking began, emanating from deeper within the cave where my flashlight couldn't reach. I ran. The cave entrance opened onto a landscape transformed. The blizzard had stopped, replaced by clear, star-filled sky and full moon illuminating endless white. I recognized nothing. The landmarks, the mountain silhouettes, all wrong, all different. Either I had traveled much farther than possible, or I wasn't in Glacier National Park anymore. In the moonlight, I saw them clearly for the first time. Dozens of them, standing motionless among distant trees, impossibly tall, impossibly thin, humanoid figures with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Their skin gleamed pale as the snow, stretched too tight over elongated frames. Where faces should be, only shadows and suggestions of sunken features. And they were all looking at me. One stepped forward, moving with a fluid grace that defied its awkward proportions. It stopped 30 yards away, tilted its featureless head, and spoke in a voice like cracking ice. Hunger recognizes hunger. My denial crumbled as I realized the terrible truth. I hadn't been stalking these creatures through the park. They had been guiding me step by step, ladder by ladder, curiosity by curiosity, toward this moment. "What do you want?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. The creature's response came not in words but in sensations that bloomed directly in my mind. Images of endless winter forests, of climbing higher and higher through ancient trees, of transcending physical limitations, of a hunger so profound it became purpose. "We want what all teachers want," it finally said aloud, "a worthy student." It extended one impossible arm, fingers too numerous and too long unfolding like pale spider legs. The transformation requires consent. The hunger must be embraced. In that moment, I felt it. A gnawing emptiness inside me that had nothing to do with food. An existential hunger that had driven me from my city life to this wilderness. That had kept me here despite the warnings. That had pulled me irresistibly toward the ladders and the mysteries they represented. "If I refuse?" I managed to ask. The creature's non-face rippled in what might have been amusement. "Then you return. Live your brief, limited existence. Die your ordinary death." It gestured toward a gap in the trees where, impossibly, I could see the lights of the ranger station miles away. "The door remains open to those who've glimpsed beyond. For now." My feet carried me backward, toward those distant lights. The creatures made no move to follow, but their collective attention pressed against my mind like a physical weight. As I reached the tree line, the tall one called out one final time, "The ladders remain, the hunger remains. We are patient." I ran through snow that should have been impassable, driven by terror and something else. A hunger to escape, to understand, to return to normal life. After what seemed like hours, but could have been minutes, I stumbled into the ranger station parking lot, collapsing at the steps. Rivera found me there, nearly frozen. As they carried me inside, her expression wasn't surprised, just resigned. "You went north after dark," she said, not a question. "What are they?" I whispered through chattering teeth. She looked away. "Legends say they were once human. Blackfeet stories call them the winter-hungry ones. Scientists who've glimpsed them propose interdimensional travelers. Hikers who've encountered them rarely speak again." She paused. "Those who do call them Wendigo, though they're not quite that either." "They offered me transformation," I admitted. Rivera's face paled. "Then you must leave. Today. Those they extend invitations to either go to them willingly or—" She couldn't finish. "Or they come for you," I thought, remembering the journal's final entry. Within hours I was packed and driving south, away from Glacier National Park, away from the ladders and clicking and pale watchers in the trees. But the hunger came with me. I rented a small apartment in Missoula, 3 hours south of Glacier. Distance brought no peace. The clicking sounds followed, fainter but persistent, coming from inside my walls at night. I'd wake to find frost patterns on my bedroom window, spelling out the same message over and over. The ladder waits. Sleep became my enemy. In dreams, I climbed endless wooden rungs into darkness, while elongated figures watched from above, their clicking speech gradually resolving into almost comprehensible words. I'd wake gasping, my fingers stretched painfully, bones aching as if trying to extend beyond their natural length. Twice I packed my car, intending to drive further south, perhaps all the way to Arizona or New Mexico, where ancient forests gave way to deserts. Both times I found myself unconsciously driving north instead, stopping only when I recognized road signs pointing toward Glacier. The hunger grew. Food lost its taste. I dropped 20 pounds in 3 weeks. My only appetite was for information, anything connected to what I'd experienced. I became a regular at the University of Montana's library, poring through anthropological records of indigenous accounts, frontier journals, Park Service incident reports. I created a massive timeline on my apartment wall, connecting disappearances, sightings, and unexplained phenomena across 2 centuries. Patterns emerged. The entities, whatever they were, operated in cycles tied to celestial events. Winter solstice marked their most active period. Their interactions with humans followed a progression: observation, invitation, often through dreams or symbolic structures, revelation, and finally, transformation or disappearance. Most importantly, I discovered I wasn't alone. Others had encountered them and survived, at least temporarily. Through obscure online forums and message boards, I connected with 3 others who described similar experiences in wilderness areas across North America. Morgan, a former wilderness guide from Olympic National Park, had found ladders in 2019 and spent 2 years running before giving in to the climb. Her last message described feeling more myself than ever before, just before her accounts went permanently silent. Hiroshi, a wildlife photographer, had captured actual images of the entities in Banff National Park. The photos showed exactly what I'd seen: impossible, elongated figures with too many joints. He'd wired me copies before apparently committing himself to a psychiatric facility. Chen, a biologist studying alpine ecosystems, provided the most valuable information. Her team had collected tissue samples after an encounter, pale, translucent material left behind on a tree where one of the creatures had been observed. Laboratory analysis showed cellular structures unlike any known organism, with evidence of both plant and animal characteristics, plus something else entirely. They exist partially outside our dimension, Chen theorized during our encrypted video call. Her face looked gaunt, her movements twitchy. They need human catalysts to fully manifest here. The transformation isn't consumption, it's collaboration. Symbiosis. Have you seen the ladders? I asked. Her expression tightened. I've climbed them. How far? Far enough to know I'll eventually climb to the top. She leaned closer to her camera. The hunger isn't just theirs. It's always been in us. The desire to transcend our limitations, to become something beyond human. They simply recognize it and offer a path. Chen disappeared 3 days after our conversation. Her research materials arrived at my apartment by courier the following week, with no explanation of how she knew my address. Among her papers, I found a map marking locations across North America, where encounters had been documented. Glacier National Park contained the highest concentration by far, with my former patrol area at its epicenter. Winter solstice approached, December 21st, just like the date in the Cave Journal's final entry. My dreams intensified. In them, I now stood at the top of the tallest ladder, looking down at my human self from above, feeling nothing but pity for the limited creature I'd once been. I began to understand the clicking language, both in dreams and during waking hours when it emerged from my heating vents, water pipes, and the spaces between floorboards. It described a process: cellular restructuring, sensory enhancement, consciousness expansion, in terms simultaneously scientific and mystical. Hunger is the beginning of transformation, it explained. Hunger focuses intention. Hunger reveals truth. On December 18th, I woke to find my sheets torn by my own hands, which had stretched during the night. Fingers now visibly longer, joints more pronounced. I could no longer deny what was happening. The transformation had begun despite my absence from Glacier, despite never having accepted their offer. Chen's research offered one possible explanation. Proximity to the entities created permanent changes to human DNA, activating dormant genetic potential. The choice wasn't whether transformation would occur, but whether it would complete naturally, or be violently accelerated through direct contact. I called Rivera at the ranger station, desperate for guidance. "You need to come back," she said after a long silence. "Those who resist the change suffer far worse than those who surrender to it." "You knew about this all along," I accused. "It's why we have the northern area restrictions. It's why we rotate staff regularly. It's why we don't report certain findings." Her voice softened. "The Park Service has a containment protocol. The entities stay primarily within Glacier's boundaries as long as we provide opportunities for connection." "You feed them people," I whispered in horror. "No, we allow those already called to answer. There's a difference." She paused. "The winter solstice convergence happens tomorrow night. If you're going to come back, it needs to be then. After that, the change becomes irreversible and eventually fatal if not completed properly. I hung up without answering. Within an hour, I'd packed minimal supplies and was driving north through a gathering snowstorm, drawn by a hunger stronger than fear, stronger than self-preservation. As I crossed into Glacier National Park boundaries near midnight, the clicking sounds inside my head synchronized perfectly with my heartbeat. Through the windshield, I watched pale figures flit between trees along the roadside, keeping pace with my vehicle effortlessly. At the ranger station, Rivera waited alone, her expression a mixture of resignation and relief. The others have gone. Safety protocol during convergence. She handed me a park radio and a map with a location marked in red. This is where you need to be at midnight tomorrow. The primary convergence point. The ladder there reaches farther than any other. What happens if I go there? I asked, though I already knew. You complete what has already begun. She nodded toward my hands, which I'd hidden in gloves despite the warmth of the building. Or you fight it and become something trapped between states, neither human nor transcended. Those are the ones we eventually have to hunt down. She showed me personnel files of rangers who had undergone the transformation over decades. Dozens who had retired suddenly or transferred without notice. Some photos showed subtle changes progressing over months, lengthening features, thinning frames, eyes growing more deeply set. Some return after, Rivera said enigmatically, changed but still themselves enough to serve as intermediaries. They help maintain the balance, keep the entities contained within the park boundaries. I finally understood her strange manner, her knowing looks. Rivera was one of them, partially transformed, serving two worlds. How long have you been between? I asked. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing an arm too long for her frame, with an extra joint between elbow and wrist. 12 years, winter solstice, 2013. Does it hurt? Only when I pretend to be fully human. Her smile revealed teeth too numerous, too sharp. The hunger never completely fades, but it becomes manageable. That night, I returned to my old cabin at North Ridge. Lake Kintla stretched frozen before it, the mountains looming black against the star-filled sky. Inside, everything remained as I'd left it months ago, with one exception. A new ladder had been constructed in the center of the living room, extending up through a hole cut perfectly in the ceiling, continuing through the roof toward the night sky. On my bed lay a journal identical to the one I'd found in the cave. Inside, blank pages waited, except for a single line on the first page. Record your transformation for those who follow. I began to write. Winter solstice arrived with unnatural stillness. No wind disturbed the pines, no animals moved through the deep snow, no clouds crossed the crystal blue sky. Even the air felt suspended, as if the entire park held its breath in anticipation. I hadn't slept. My transformation accelerated through the night, fingers now fully 2 inches longer than normal, joints reconfiguring painfully, skin stretching and paling until blue veins showed prominently beneath. My reflection revealed sunken cheeks and enlarged eyes, with pupils that had expanded to nearly eliminate the iris. Most disturbing was my new perception. I could sense the park in ways impossible to describe, layers of reality overlapping like transparent sheets, vibrations from distant movements, echoes of past events imprinted on the landscape. The clicking language now made perfect sense, complex concepts transmitted through simple, rhythmic patterns. The hunger had become unbearable, not for food, but for completion. Every cell in my altered body strained toward the convergence point marked on Rivera's map, a remote clearing 6 miles north of my cabin, accessible only by a trail that didn't appear on official park maps. Before departing, I finished my journal entry, detailing everything I'd learned for whoever might find themselves on this same path. I included Chen's research, notes on the transformation process, and warnings about the point of no return. Whether I left it as cautionary tale or recruitment tool, I couldn't say. The sun began its brief winter arc as I set out, snowshoes strapped to boots that barely fit my elongating feet. Though the temperature registered well below freezing, I felt no cold. My uniform hung loosely on my thinning frame, which had shed nearly 40 pounds since my first encounter. The unmarked trail revealed itself to my enhanced perception, not as a physical path, but as a current of energy flowing through the forest, visible as subtle blue luminescence against the white snow. I followed it effortlessly, moving with new grace despite my awkward proportions. Halfway to the convergence point, I encountered the first of them, a fully transformed entity waiting motionless beside a massive pine. Up close, without fear clouding my perception, I could see the vestigial human features beneath its alien appearance, the suggestion of a nose, the remnants of lips, eyes deep set, but unmistakably conscious and intelligent. It made no sound, but understanding formed directly in my mind. The others wait, the circle prepares, the hunger culminates today. More appeared as I continued, dozens of the entities standing sentinel along my route, each acknowledging me with slight movements of their two long limbs. Some seemed ancient, their forms refined beyond any human resemblance. Others retained more human aspects, their transformations more recent or incomplete. I recognized one, its stance, the particular angle of its head, as Ranger Dawson, though no conventional human features remained to confirm this. It extended one elongated hand, offering a small carved token, a miniature wooden ladder. By noon, I reached the convergence point. The clearing stood empty, except for an enormous ladder at its center. Crude, yet somehow architectural, extending upward at least 60 feet to the lowest branches of an ancient pine, then continuing up through the canopy until lost from sight. Around its base, small objects had been arranged in a perfect circle: watches, rings, badges, car keys, wallets, personal effects of those who had climbed before me. The entities began to gather, emerging from the forest to form a larger circle around the ladder. Their clicking communications built into a rhythmic chant that vibrated through the ground, through my altered body, synchronizing with my heartbeat and breathing. Rivera arrived last, moving with the fluid grace of one between states. "The convergence only happens on winter solstice," she explained, her voice changed, deeper, resonant with harmonics human vocal cords couldn't produce. "The shortest day, the longest night, when the barrier between dimensions thins." "What exactly am I becoming?" I asked, my own voice similarly altered. "Something that has always existed in human potential," she answered. "The next evolutionary step, accelerated through connection with entities that exist across multiple realities." "And what happens when I reach the top?" Her expression shifted into something not quite a smile. "Completion, understanding, purpose." The sun touched the western mountains. The clicking intensified, now accompanied by a visible resonance, the air between trees shimmering like heat waves despite the cold. The ladder began to glow with the same blue luminescence I'd followed through the forest. Rivera nodded toward it. "They came to this reality eons ago, but cannot fully manifest without human catalysts. Each transformation strengthens their presence, expands their influence." She placed my park ranger badge among the objects circling the ladder. "You're not their prey, you're their bridge." As sunset faded into deepening blue twilight, I approached the ladder. Each rung hummed with energy as my elongated fingers wrapped around it. The first step upward sent waves of sensation through my transforming body, pain and pleasure indistinguishable, cellular restructuring accelerating visibly as my limbs stretched further, additional joints forming to facilitate the climb. 20 feet up, I passed through a layer of cold so intense it would have killed a human instantly. My altered physiology adapted immediately, skin hardening, internal chemistry shifting. 40 feet up, at the lowest branches, gravity seemed to change orientation. I was no longer climbing up but across, though the visual perspective remained vertical. The entities below had begun a slow, ritualistic movement around the ladder's base, their forms blurring as they accelerated beyond human perception. 60 feet up, the physical world began to fragment around me. I could see through gaps in reality, glimpses of other forests, other mountains, landscapes impossible to comprehend with human senses. The hunger drove me onward, each rung bringing clarity and purpose. I don't know how long I climbed. Time lost meaning, distance became subjective. The ladder extended beyond physical possibility, beyond the tallest trees, beyond what should have been the upper atmosphere. Still, I climbed, driven by hunger and something new, a sense of homecoming. Near what felt like journey's end, I encountered others on the ladder, transformed beings climbing alongside me, above me, below me. Some I recognized as the missing hikers and rangers from my research. Others were clearly ancient, their forms perfected through centuries of existence between states. We acknowledged each other with the clicking language, sharing experiences, knowledge, perspectives impossible in human form. The top, when I finally reached it, wasn't a physical location, but a state of perception, a vantage point from which I could see the true nature of reality. The entities weren't invaders or predators, but guardians of thresholds between dimensions, seekers of worthy collaborators who could help maintain the delicate balance between worlds. The hunger transformed into its true purpose, not consumption, but perception, not destruction, but creation. Through our union, new realities could form, new thresholds could open, new understanding could emerge. My final human thought, before consciousness expanded beyond individual identity, acknowledged the cosmic joke. What humans feared as monsters were simply those who had evolved beyond human limitations. The real horror was not in the transformation, but in the resistance to it. The ranger who found this journal reported it as expected. The new recruit who receives it will feel the first stirrings of curiosity, then hunger. The cycle continues. In Glacier National Park, ladders appear in the deep woods where no human trail leads. Those drawn to them feel the hunger beginning, the desire to understand, to transcend, to climb beyond human limitation into something greater. The winter-hungry ones watch from the trees, clicking their ancient language, patient as the mountains themselves. They recognize hunger as the first step of transformation. They know curiosity leads to the ladder, and the ladder leads to becoming. Some nights, when the moon is full and the air perfectly still, visitors to remote sections of the park report seeing impossibly tall, thin figures moving among distant trees. Rangers advise staying on marked trails. The hunger always finds those ready to evolve. The ladders always wait. I felt the weight of my uniform the moment I entered the restricted areas of the park. The crisp mountain air of Glacier National Park filled my lungs as I hiked through the northern trail system, my boots crunching on the thin layer of early autumn frost. 3 weeks into my position as a seasonal ranger, and I still couldn't believe I'd landed the job. The position had appeared in my email like a gift from the universe. After my wife's death last winter, I needed escape from our empty apartment in Seattle. The walls closed in with each passing day, her absence more suffocating than her presence had ever been. When the job listing appeared, seasonal ranger position, remote outpost, immediate start, I applied without hesitation. My background in environmental science and wilderness first response made me qualified, if not ideal. You'll be stationed at Acacheta Lake, Supervisor Morrison had explained during my orientation, his weathered face serious beneath his campaign hat. It's one of our more remote outposts, about 15 miles from the eastern entrance. Not many visitors make it out there, especially as the season winds down. What's Acacheta mean? I'd asked. It's Blackfeet, means fighter or warrior. The lake's been called that longer than it's been part of the park. He'd pause then, examining me with pale blue eyes. You sure you want the Acacheta assignment? Most rangers prefer something closer to headquarters. I'd insisted it was perfect. Solitude was exactly what I needed. The cabin stood on a rocky bluff overlooking the north shore of the lake, surrounded by dense pine forest on 3 sides. It was rustic but well maintained. A single bedroom, small kitchen with propane stove, living area with a wood-burning fireplace, and a covered porch that offered breathtaking views of the water and mountains beyond. My duties were straightforward: maintain the trails, conduct wildlife surveys, assist any hikers or backpackers in the area, and radio in daily reports. As the season wound down and winter approached, visitor numbers would dwindle until the snows made the area inaccessible. The isolation suited me fine. During my first 2 weeks, I threw myself into the work. I cleared deadfall from the trails, photographed moose and elk for population studies, and spent evenings reading through the detailed journals left by previous rangers. Many wrote about the spectacular beauty of Acacheta, the northern lights dancing over the lake, the silence of the first snow. But some entries were strange. A ranger from 2018 wrote, "Third night of hearing crying from the North Shore. Investigated again. Nothing found. Bear activity normal. No signs of injured animals or distressed hikers." Another dated 2015. Temperature dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit last night. Woke to what sounded like scratching on the cabin walls. Tracks outside resembled deer, but stride measurements inconsistent with any known species. I dismissed these as the products of isolation and imagination until the night of my third week. I was conducting a nocturnal wildlife survey positioned in a blind about a mile from my cabin. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead with no moon. Through my night vision equipment, I watched a small clearing where wildlife often emerged to drink from a stream. At 1:17 a.m., the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded dense white before me, and the digital thermometer dropped from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to 27 degrees Fahrenheit in minutes. The forest fell silent. No insects chirping, no night birds calling, no rustle of small mammals in the underbrush. Through my night vision scope, I saw something move at the clearing's edge. My pulse quickened, anticipating a wolf or perhaps a mountain lion. Instead, a single deer stepped into view. Except something was wrong. Its proportions seemed off. Legs too long, neck stretched unnaturally. It moved with jerky, unnatural strides. When it turned toward my blind, my stomach clenched. Its eyes reflected my infrared equipment with an intense white glow, too bright, too aware. No deer looks at you like it knows you're watching. No deer stares with such intelligence. I held my breath, finger hovering over my camera shutter. The deer tilted its head at an impossible angle, neck contorting until it seemed broken. Then it made a sound. Not a deer's grunt or bleat, but a sound that raised the hair on my arms. It sounded like my name, whispered by a human throat trying to mimic a deer's voice. I dropped my camera, the plastic housing cracking against the blind's floor. When I looked back up, the deer was gone. The forest remained silent, the temperature still unnaturally low. That night, I pored over the field guides in my cabin, but found nothing to explain what I'd seen. Sleep evaded me, my mind replaying that unnatural movement, that impossible sound. The next morning, I radioed headquarters with my daily check-in, but said nothing about the deer. What could I say that wouldn't sound like the ramblings of an isolated mind? Instead, I hiked to the local ranger station, a small outpost about 7 miles from my cabin. The seasonal ranger there, a middle-aged woman named Abigail, greeted me with surprise. "Didn't expect to see anyone from Acacheta this time of year," she said, offering coffee from a battered thermos. "Just needed some human contact," I admitted. "Been a quiet few weeks." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Acacheta gets to people sometimes. Too quiet for most." I hesitated, then asked, "Have you ever noticed anything strange about the wildlife around the lake, particularly deer?" She set her coffee down slowly. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Some of the journal entries from previous rangers mentioned unusual sightings." Abigail studied me, then sighed. "There's a reason most rangers don't request Acacheta, particularly as winter approaches." She reached for a worn book on her shelf, its spine cracked with age. "This might interest you. It's a collection of Blackfeet legends about the area." I took the book, opening to where a pressed maple leaf marked a page. The heading read, "Wendigo Territory, the Hungry Spirits of Winter." "The old-timers say Acacheta Lake freezes earlier than any other in the park," Abigail said quietly. "Not because of elevation or exposure, but because of what lives in those woods." The deer bolted when I was 30 yards from the cabin, disappearing into the pine forest with unnatural speed. I stood frozen, scanning the trees, but saw nothing except shadows deepening as the storm clouds gathered. Inside, I double-checked the locks, a habit more than a practical measure, as any determined person could break a window. The cabin felt different now, the cozy isolation transformed into something oppressive. I pulled the book Abigail had given me from my pack and settled before the fireplace. The Wendigo legend was familiar to anyone with passing knowledge of Algonquin folklore. The stories described a malevolent spirit of winter, starvation, and the wilderness. According to the text, Wendigos were often depicted as emaciated, with deer-like features, antlers, elongated limbs, and insatiable hunger. They were said to possess humans or appear as twisted versions of forest animals. What caught my attention was the specific mention of Akacheta Lake. The Blackfeet avoided the northern shore in winter months, believing it to be a gateway where the barrier between our world and the spirit world grew thin. Those who ignored the warnings and remained after the first frost often disappeared or were found wandering, mad with hunger and speaking of creatures that walked like men but were not men. I closed the book, troubled. Folklore often contained kernels of truth, warnings about real dangers dressed in supernatural clothing. Perhaps the Wendigo was just a way to explain the dangers of winter isolation, hypothermia's disorienting effects, or the erratic behavior of starving wildlife. The radio crackled, startling me. Morrison's voice came through with static. Base to Akacheta. Storms accelerated, expecting 8 to 12 inches tonight. How's your situation? I reported all was well, provisions adequate, no concerns. Any visitors or hikers in your area? He asked. None in the past 3 days, I replied. There was a pause before Morrison continued. Keep your radio close. This storm's coming in hard. Might lose communication for a while. After signing off, I stoked the fire and prepared a simple dinner. Outside, the wind howled as the first snowflakes began to fall. By nightfall, a white curtain obscured the view from my windows, the lake invisible beyond the swirling snow. I was washing my dishes when I heard it, a sound almost lost in the storm. A voice calling my name. I froze, hands dripping in the sink. It came again, clearer this time, a woman's voice, my wife's voice. Impossible. Yet there it was again, a desperate cry for help carried on the wind. I grabbed my heavy coat, flashlight, and service pistol. Rational thought told me this was dangerous foolishness. No one could be out in this storm, least of all my dead wife. But the voice pulled at something primal in me, overriding reason. On the porch, the wind nearly knocked me down. Snow stung my exposed face as I swept the powerful beam across the white landscape. Nothing but swirling snow and the black skeletons of trees. Hello? I called, my voice swallowed by the storm. The answering cry came from the direction of the lake, fainter now. I hesitated, 1 foot on the porch steps. Every wilderness training manual warned against exactly this, leaving shelter during a blizzard. But that voice. I secured a guide rope to the porch railing, tying the other end to my belt. At least I could find my way back. Then I plunged into the storm, using the flashlight to navigate the path to the lake. The snow was already ankle-deep, the temperature well below freezing. I kept calling out, receiving increasingly faint replies. At the lakeshore, my flashlight beam reflected off the water, still unfrozen despite the cold. The voice now seemed to come from across the water. That's when I saw the tracks, impossibly large deer prints leading into the lake. Not out, only in. As if something had walked straight into the dark water. A sudden silence fell. The wind died completely. The snowfall thinned, and the night became preternaturally quiet. On the lake's surface, something moved. At first I thought it was just ripples caused by the wind. Then I realized it was a shape, partially submerged, moving toward shore. My flashlight caught the reflection of eyes, too high above the water for any normal animal. I backed away slowly, following my rope line. The shape continued its approach, gradually revealing more of itself. Long limbs, a head crowned with branches that I now recognized were not branches at all. My boot caught on a hidden rock, and I fell hard. The flashlight tumbled from my grasp, its beam spinning wildly before going out. In the sudden darkness, I heard something emerge from the water, the sound of heavy limbs dragging across the rocky shore. I scrambled to my feet, abandoning stealth for speed. Following the rope by feel, I half ran, half stumbled back toward the cabin. Behind me came the sound of pursuit, not the crashing of a large animal through undergrowth, but something more deliberate. Calculated footsteps, matching my pace but not overtaking me. The morning after the storm dawned brilliantly clear, the landscape transformed into a postcard vision of winter beauty. 3 inches of fresh powder blanketed everything, softening the world's edges. In daylight, last night's terror seemed distant and improbable. Yet the deer skull remained, watching me from its branch. I photographed it from multiple angles, then carefully approached. No animal could have placed it there. The branch was 15 feet off the ground, with no nearby trees for an animal to leap from. Upon closer inspection, the skull showed no signs of weathering. This was fresh. Using a fallen branch, I knocked it down, half expecting something supernatural to happen. It fell with the ordinary thud of bone on snow. I examined it carefully, finding nothing unusual except for strange markings etched into the bone. Symbols I didn't recognize, similar to those in Abigail's book. I buried the skull in a deep snowdrift a quarter-mile from my cabin, marking the location in my field journal. Then I returned to review the cabin's security. All windows intact, locks functional. The only unusual feature was a set of scratches on the north wall beneath the bedroom window. 4 parallel lines dragged through the wood stain. That afternoon, I hiked to the weather monitoring station 2 miles west of my cabin to check instruments and record data. The forest felt different after the storm, quieter, as if the wildlife had retreated. No birds called, no squirrels darted through branches. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the silence. At the monitoring station, I found the equipment functioning normally, though the temperature readings were puzzling. Last night's storm had brought temperatures well below freezing. Yet the automated log showed a bizarre anomaly. Between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m., precisely when I'd heard the scratching and voice at my cabin, the thermometer had recorded a sudden drop to minus 37 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by an equally rapid return to normal winter temperatures. I was entering this information in my log when I heard the crunch of snow behind me. I whirled around, hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. A man stood 20 yards away watching me. He wore inadequate clothing for the conditions, jeans, flannel shirt, light jacket, yet showed no signs of discomfort. His face was gaunt, beard unkempt, eyes fever-bright. "Hello there," I called, keeping my voice steady. "Are you lost? Do you need assistance?" He didn't respond immediately, just tilted his head in that same unnatural angle I'd seen the deer perform. "Not lost," he finally said, voice raspy as if unused. "Hunting." "Hunting season's closed in the park," I informed him, maintaining professional courtesy while mentally calculating my escape routes. He smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous, too sharp. "Not hunting animals." My hand stayed near my weapon. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. What's your name and how did you get up here? The roads are closed." "Been here always," he replied, taking a step forward. "You have food at your cabin, plenty of food." The way he emphasized food sent a chill through me unrelated to the temperature. "The cabin is federal property," I said firmly, "and I need to see some ID now." He took another step, and I drew my weapon, holding it at the ready position. "That's far enough, sir." The man stopped, his smile widening. "You'll need more than that, Ranger." He gestured toward the trees behind him. "We're hungry, so hungry after the long summer." I followed his gesture and felt my stomach drop. Among the trees stood dark figures, at least 5 of them, partially obscured by pines. Like the man, they were unnaturally thin, their postures wrong somehow. "We smelled you last night," the man continued conversationally. "Almost had you at the lake. The female voice worked well, didn't it? Your memories made it easy to choose which voice would make you leave safety." My hands began to shake. "Who are you people? This is a restricted area during storm conditions." He laughed, a dry, crackling sound like kindling catching fire. "We are the winter, we are the hunger. We are what waits when food grows scarce and nights grow long." He inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring. "You're afraid. Fear makes the meat sweeter." The first hour after sunset was the hardest. They circled continuously, testing windows, scratching at walls, their movements creating a constant symphony of dread. I counted at least 7 distinct entities, though their footsteps suggested either many more or an inhuman ability to move rapidly around the cabin. They began speaking just after 7 o'clock, a cacophony of voices, some familiar, some strange. My wife's voice called sweetly from the north window. My father's gruff tone emerged from the chimney. A child's laughter tinkled beneath the eaves. "Just a taste," whispered a voice directly outside the bedroom door. "We only need a taste." I remained in the main room, keeping the fire roaring, moving between windows to monitor their positions. Occasionally, the flashlight beam would catch a figure, sometimes human-like, sometimes more akin to the elongated deer I'd first seen. They never fully revealed themselves, staying just at the edge of visibility. At 8:15 p.m., they began a new tactic. The gaunt man I'd met earlier appeared before the living room window, standing in full moonlight. No attempt at hiding, no lurking in shadows. He pressed a skeletal hand against the glass, breath fogging the cold surface. "We can't enter without invitation," he said, voice clear despite the barrier. "That's the old way, the rule. But we can wait. We're patient." "What do you want?" I called, keeping my distance from the window. His smile stretched inhumanly wide. "To share, to consume, to become. I was like you once, a ranger, studying the wilderness." He pressed harder against the glass, fingers elongating slightly. "Now I am the wilderness." "When?" I demanded. "What was your name?" "Names are for the living," he replied. "Time is for the dying. I simply am now." His head tilted, neck cracking audibly. "But I wore this uniform during a hunger moon 7 years past. Others wore it before me. Soon you'll join us." "I'm not opening that door," I stated firmly. "You won't need to," he replied. "We have all night. The cold will enter, the fire will die, power will fail. And when the shadows grow long enough, the rules change." As if on cue, the electric lights flickered and died, leaving only the fireplace illumination. The backup generator should have engaged automatically, but remained silent. The man, the Wendigo, smiled again and retreated from the window, melting into darkness. I moved quickly, lighting every candle and oil lamp. The manual thermometer on the wall registered a rapid temperature drop, 68 degrees Fahrenheit inside the cabin at sunset, now 52 degrees Fahrenheit despite the fire. The cold was penetrating impossibly fast. Outside, the voices continued but changed character, less human now, more primal. Moans, clicks, and hollow wooden knocking sounds replaced words. The pacing footsteps took on strange rhythms, sometimes syncing in unison, sometimes chaotically overlapping. By 10 o'clock, ice crystals had formed on the inside of the windows, despite the fire. The temperature had dropped to 41 degrees Fahrenheit inside. I pulled on additional layers and moved closer to the flames, feeding them constantly. My breath clouded before me, and my extremities began to ache with cold. The radio remained dead. My cell phone, useless this deep in the wilderness even under normal conditions, displayed no signal. I was utterly alone. At 11:17 p.m., I noted the time precisely in my journal. The first real attack came. A tremendous crash shook the north wall, as if something massive had hurled itself against the cabin. Wood creaked and groaned but held. Another crash followed, then another, methodically moving around the structure, testing for weaknesses. I fired a warning shot through the bedroom window, shattering the glass. The cold rushed in immediately, but the crashing stopped. In the sudden silence, I heard a curious sound, splintering ice, like a frozen lake beginning to break up. Moving cautiously to the broken window, I peered out. The full moon illuminated the landscape with unnatural brightness, casting everything in stark contrasts of brilliant white and pitch black. In that ghostly light, I saw Akacheta Lake transforming. The surface, which had remained strangely unfrozen despite the temperatures, was now developing a crust of ice. But the ice formed patterns, not the typical expansion from shores inward, but geometric shapes, symbols similar to those I'd seen etched on the deer skull. As I watched, transfixed, the ice completed its pattern. The entire lake now resembled an enormous sigil, glowing faintly blue in the moonlight. A voice spoke directly behind me. "The gate opens." I whirled, firing instinctively. The gaunt man stood impossibly inside my cabin, though all doors remained barricaded. My bullet passed through him as if through smoke, embedding in the wall behind. He flickered like a bad television signal, his form unstable, one moment human, the next something far more ancient and terrible. Antlers sprouted and receded from his skull, limbs elongated and contracted. his rib cage pushed against skin stretched too tight across bone. "Once the lake freezes in the pattern, we can enter anywhere," he explained conversationally. "The old rules bend on Hunger Moon night." Dawn found me 7 miles south of the burning cabin, huddled in a natural rock shelter I'd discovered by desperate luck. The night had been brutal, temperatures well below freezing, wind cutting through my layers, fingers and toes numbed despite my best efforts. Frostbite seemed inevitable, yet I was alive. Whether that remained a blessing or turned curse was yet to be determined. The rising sun brought no warmth but offered visibility and direction. I forced my stiffened limbs to move, continuing southward on the main trail. My emergency pack had been lost in the cabin fire, leaving me without food or water. The service pistol remained, though I'd expended half its ammunition firing at things bullets couldn't harm. By midday, I'd covered another 3 miles, my pace slowing as exhaustion and hunger took their toll. The forest remained unnaturally silent. No birds, no squirrels, as if the natural world still held its breath after the Hunger Moon's passage. It was during a brief rest that I first noticed the change in myself. My hunger, which should have been gnawing after nearly 24 hours without food, had transformed into something different. A cold, hollow sensation centered not in my stomach but deeper in my core. I found myself sniffing the air, catching scents I'd never detected before. The muskiness of a rabbit's burrow 100 yards east, the lingering trace of a fox that had passed hours earlier. When I resumed walking, my gait had altered subtly. My stride lengthened, feet placing themselves with newfound precision on the snowy path. I moved more quietly, more efficiently, more predatory. The gaunt Wendigo's final words echoed, "You'll join us eventually." I forced those thoughts aside and pressed on. 3 more miles passed beneath my increasingly sure-footed stride before I spotted the first search party. 3 figures moved through the forest ahead, orange safety vests visible against the snow. Park Service personnel, undoubtedly sent by Morrison after our communications failed. I should have felt relief. Instead, I experienced a momentary horrifying impulse. Hunger at the sight of warm bodies, the urge to stalk rather than greet. I stopped in my tracks, appalled. The cold hollow in my core pulsed, expanded. With conscious effort, I raised my arms and called out, my voice raspy from smoke and cold. "Here, over here, Park Service." The search party turned, rifles raising instinctively before recognizing my uniform beneath the soot and grime. They rushed forward, faces registering shock at my condition. "Jesus!" exclaimed the lead searcher, a senior ranger I recognized from headquarters. "What happened to you? Where's your gear? We got reports of a fire visible from the valley." "Cabin burned," I managed, shivering now that I'd stopped moving. The predatory feeling receded, replaced by human exhaustion. Had to escape. Wendigos. The rangers exchanged glances, the kind reserved for trauma victims or the mentally unstable. But the lead ranger's expression held something else. Recognition, perhaps even fear. "Let's get you back to headquarters," he said, voice carefully neutral. "Medical team standing by. You can debrief when you're stable." They wrapped me in emergency blankets, offered water and energy bars, which I accepted gratefully. As we began the journey back, one of the younger rangers fell into step beside me. "Did you say Wendigos?" he asked quietly. Before I could answer, the lead ranger cut in sharply. "That's enough. Medical will handle the debriefing." The remainder of the journey passed in strained silence. Twice I caught the lead ranger watching me with narrowed eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Did he know something? Had he experienced the Akacheta horrors himself? At headquarters, I was immediately transferred to medical. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficiency in her movements, examined me thoroughly, treating minor burns, checking for frostbite, drawing blood. "Your core temperature is concerning," she noted, frowning at her thermometer. "It's reading 94.7, but you're showing none of the usual symptoms of hypothermia." I said nothing, remembering the Wendigo's cold touch, the seed planted within. After the examination, I was provided a private room, fresh clothes, hot food. The sensation of warmth returning to my body brought momentary comfort, though the hollow cold in my core remained untouched. Morrison appeared at my door an hour later, his weathered face grave. He closed the door behind him and took the chair opposite my bed. "I need your full account," he said without preamble. "Everything that happened at Akachita." I told him everything. The strange deer, the voices, the gaunt man claiming to be a former ranger, the ritual on the frozen lake, my desperate burning of the cabin. Throughout my recounting, Morrison's expression remained carefully neutral, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped his clipboard. When I finished, he asked only one question. "Did any of them touch you?" The lie formed automatically, instinctively. "No, I kept them at bay until I escaped the fire." Morrison studied me a moment longer, then nodded once. "Your official report will reflect that you observed unusual wildlife behavior, consistent with rabies or other disease. Fearing infection, you maintained isolation in your cabin. An electrical fire forced evacuation. You attempted to reach headquarters but became disoriented in the storm." "That's not what happened," I protested. "That's what goes in the report," he replied firmly. "Akecheta Lake is being decommissioned. No more ranger assignments there." "Because of the Wendigos?" Morrison's gaze hardened. "There is no such thing as Wendigos." "Then why did you order me to evacuate immediately when I mentioned the Hunger Moon? Why are you closing the Akacheta station? What happened to the ranger from 7 years ago?" He stood abruptly. "You suffered trauma and cold exposure, possibly smoke inhalation. The mind plays tricks under such circumstances." "You know I'm telling the truth," I insisted. "You've seen it before." Morrison paused at the door, shoulders slumping slightly. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its official edge, revealing bone-deep weariness. "Blackwood National Park has existed for over a century," he said quietly. "In that time, certain patterns have emerged. Certain locations have characteristics that defy conventional explanation. We manage these situations as best we can." He turned, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "The ranger assigned to Akacheta 7 years ago disappeared during the first full moon after winter solstice. Search parties found nothing except a perfectly preserved deer skull on the cabin porch. The ranger from 14 years ago was found wandering near the southern boundary, babbling about voices in the lake. He committed suicide 2 months later." "And 21 years ago?" I asked, sensing the pattern. "The entire cabin was found frozen solid. Inside temperature registered -70 degrees. The ranger's body was never recovered, though we found footprints leading into the lake. Impossible footprints." "Why keep sending rangers there if you know what happens?" Morrison's expression darkened. "Policy requires all stations remain manned during winter months. Some decisions are made above my pay grade." He hesitated, then added, "But we select Akacheta candidates carefully, always single individuals with few family connections. Usually those processing grief or trauma, seeking isolation. Like me, after my wife's death." The realization should have angered me, but instead brought only a hollow acknowledgement. I had been chosen as expendable. "What happens now?" I asked. "You'll be placed on medical leave, then reassigned to visitor services at headquarters. No more remote stations." He pulled a business card from his pocket, placing it on my bedside table. "This is the contact information for the park's psychological services. I suggest you use it." After he left, I sat in silence, assessing my condition. The hollow cold remained, a sliver of ice lodged within my being. When I closed my eyes, I could sense the lake despite the miles between us, feel the broken pattern of ice slowly reforming, waiting for next year's hunger moon. 3 days later, I was released from medical with a clean bill of health, despite the doctor's continued puzzlement over my persistently low body temperature. I accepted the visitor services reassignment without complaint, moving into staff housing near headquarters. Life resumed a semblance of normalcy. I conducted tours, answered visitor questions, filed reports. Colleagues noted that I seemed different, quieter, more observant, with an uncanny ability to predict weather changes and locate lost hikers. I smiled and attributed these skills to my wilderness experience. What I didn't tell them was how the forest had begun speaking to me in ways it never had before. How I could sense animals moving through underbrush 100 yards away. How food increasingly lost its appeal while the cold hollow inside expanded. I didn't tell them about my dreams, Dreams of running on four limbs through moonlit snow, of strange sigils forming on frozen water, of hunger so profound it transcended mere physical need. I didn't tell them that each month, as the full moon approached, the calling grew stronger, pulling me northward, toward Acacheta Lake. 7 months after my experience, I submitted my resignation from the Park Service. My official reason, pursuing new opportunities. My actual destination, a remote cabin in northern Canada, far from any human habitation, where I might contain whatever was growing inside me. Before leaving, I visited Abigail one last time, returning her book of Blackfeet legends. She examined me with knowing eyes. "You didn't escape," she said softly. "Not really." "No," I admitted, "but I'm fighting it." She nodded, then reached into her desk, retrieving a small leather pouch. "Protection," she explained, pressing it into my hand. "The elders say it cannot cure one who is changing, but it may slow the process, give you more time as yourself." The pouch contained herbs with a pungent, earthly scent. It burned slightly against my palm, uncomfortable but endurable. "Why didn't you warn me?" I asked. "About Acacheta?" Abigail's eyes held ancient sadness. "Would you have believed, or would you have dismissed it as superstition as all the others did?" She sighed. "Some warnings must be experienced to be heeded." I left the next morning, driving north as winter approached once more. The Canadian wilderness welcomed me, vast, empty, a place where I might harm no one when the hunger finally consumed me completely. My new cabin sits beside an unnamed lake, smaller than Acacheta, but similar in its perfect stillness. Each night, I secure the doors with more than locks, with symbols copied from Abigail's book, with bundles of sacred herbs, with prayers to gods I never believed in until I met their opposites. Each morning, I check my reflection, searching for changes. The hollow cold continues expanding, my appetite for normal food diminishing. My body temperature has stabilized at 92.3 degrees, clinically hypothermic, yet I feel no discomfort. My night vision has sharpened remarkably. My movements grow more fluid, more predatory with each passing week. I write this account as testament, as warning. The Wendigo's touch is transformative, not immediately but inexorably. The hunger moon approaches again, and with it, my first true test. Will the protections hold? Will my humanity endure another cycle? I've left instructions with a lawyer in the nearest town. If I do not check in monthly, this narrative will be delivered to the Blackwood National Park headquarters. Attention, Ranger Morrison. Perhaps it will prevent the next Acacheta assignment. Perhaps it will save the next lonely, grief-stricken ranger from my fate. Or perhaps, when the lake before my cabin freezes in strange patterns beneath the hunger moon, I will finally answer the calling that grows stronger each day. Perhaps I will walk onto that ice, joining the ancient dance of winter and starvation. Perhaps, when next year's assigned ranger reports strange deer behavior and voices calling in the night, one of those voices will be mine. For winter always returns, hunger is eternal, and the Wendigo patient. The darkness among the trees became my office when I accepted the job as a park ranger. Glacier National Park in winter is a different world, a realm of pristine white contrasted against ancient pines, where the silence has texture and your breath hangs suspended in the frigid air. The locals call the northernmost section Akaitapiwa, an old Blackfoot word meaning the place of frozen spirits. Most visitors never venture there, even in summer. In winter, only park staff are permitted, and even then, only when necessary. I wasn't supposed to be here. My assignment was meant to be temporary, 3 months at the visitor center while I figured out my next move after graduating with a forestry degree. But when Ranger Morrison went missing in December, the Park Service needed someone to cover his territory until spring. The pay was double, and I needed the money to finally clear my student loans. What I didn't know then was that Morrison was the third ranger to disappear from that sector in the past decade. Just routine patrols, Chief Ranger Bennett had assured me, his weathered face betraying nothing. Check the emergency cabins, monitor for unauthorized entries, and report any unusual wildlife activity. The terrain's challenging, but nothing you can't handle. They gave me a cabin near Lake Kintla, Ranger Outpost 7, far from the usual tourist areas. The one-room structure was simple but sturdy, with a wood stove, basic amenities, and a radio system that worked when the weather permitted. The isolation didn't bother me initially. I'd always been comfortable in solitude, finding peace in the whispers of the forest rather than human conversation. My first week passed uneventfully. I patrolled my assigned routes, maintaining the cross-country ski trails and checking the motion sensor cameras set up for wildlife research. The days were short, the nights long, but I settled into a routine. I'd wake before dawn, patrol until dusk, then return to my cabin to log my findings, eat, and read by lamplight until sleep came. It was during my second week that I found the first anomaly: tracks in the snow about 5 miles northeast of my cabin. They resembled elk prints, but were oddly spaced, as if the creature had an irregular gait. When I followed them, they led to a frozen creek where they simply stopped. No crossing marks, no return path. They just ended at the ice. I photographed them, made notes, and reported it during my evening radio check-in. "Probably just an injured elk," Bennett responded, his voice crackling through static. "Mark it on your map, and we'll have wildlife take a look when conditions improve." That night, the temperature dropped to -20. I stoked the fire before crawling into my sleeping bag, listening to the wood pop and crack in the stove. Sleep came quickly, but sometime in the deepest part of night, I jolted awake. Something was outside my cabin. The sound was subtle at first, a soft scraping against the outer wall. It could have been a branch moved by wind, except there was no wind that night. The forest stood frozen in perfect stillness. I listened, barely breathing, as the scraping moved methodically around the perimeter of the cabin. When it reached the window, I heard another sound, a wet, clicking noise, like someone rapidly tapping their tongue against the roof of their mouth. I lay motionless, my heart hammering against my ribs. The logical part of my brain suggested a deer or elk investigating the cabin, common enough behavior. But something more primal rejected this explanation. I reached for my flashlight, my hand trembling slightly. The scratching stopped. For several long seconds, silence pressed against my ears. Then a sharp crack, like a breaking branch, sounded from the direction of the lake, followed by the distant sound of ice fracturing. I didn't sleep again that night. At first light, I investigated. Fresh tracks surrounded my cabin, the same unusual elk-like prints I'd found before, but these weren't made by any elk. The stride was too long, the impression too deep. What disturbed me most was how they approached the cabin from the forest, circled it completely, then led directly to the lake where they vanished at the shoreline. I radioed it in, trying to keep my voice casual as I described the tracks. "Sounds like you've got yourself a case of the Kintla creeper," Bennett chuckled, using the nickname local rangers had for a particularly large mountain lion that occasionally passed through the area. "Nothing to worry about, just keep your sidearm handy." But Bennett hadn't seen the tracks, hadn't heard that clicking sound. Over the next few days, I found more anomalies. Trees with bark stripped at impossible heights, animal carcasses arranged in circular patterns, and once a set of antlers lodged high in a pine's branches, 20 feet above ground. I documented everything meticulously, though I began to keep certain details to myself during check-ins. Something told me that dwelling too much on these oddities would get me pulled from my assignment, labeled as another ranger who couldn't handle the isolation. Then came the worst storm of the season, burying the region under 3 feet of fresh snow. Park operations suspended all non-essential activities, and I was instructed to remain at the cabin until conditions improved. For 2 days, I watched the world disappear under endless white. My radio picked up nothing but static. I was completely alone. On the third night, as the storm finally abated, I heard a sound that froze my blood, a long, keening wail that seemed to rise from the lake itself. It wasn't a wolf or any animal I recognized. It was almost human, yet fundamentally wrong, like a voice trying to remember how to form sounds after centuries of silence. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, my palms slick with sweat despite the cold. Logic told me to stay inside, but I'd been trained to investigate unusual occurrences. I stepped onto my porch, the beam of my flashlight cutting through darkness. The night was crystalline, stars emerging as the storm clouds receded. The fresh snow reflected moonlight, creating an eerie blue glow across the landscape. I swept my light toward the lake and caught a glimpse of movement at the tree line. Something was watching me from between the pines. It stood upright but hunched, taller than a man. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette against the snow. As my light found it, the figure retreated deeper into the trees, not rushing but moving with deliberate purpose. The wail came again, this time from behind me, though I'd swear the figure I'd seen never opened what might have been its mouth. I backed into my cabin, locked the door, and spent the night with my rifle across my lap, the radio hissing useless static beside me. In the morning, I found a carcass on my porch, a half-eaten deer, its ribcage splayed open like hands in prayer. Most of the meat was gone, but the organs remained untouched. The snow around it showed those same strange tracks, but they led in a circle around my cabin before vanishing again at the lake shore. I knew then that something was hunting in my territory, something that wanted me to know it was there. After finding the deer carcass, I knew I needed more information. My weekly supply run to the ranger station provided the perfect opportunity to dig deeper without raising suspicions. The main station at West Glacier was quiet in winter, staffed by a skeleton crew who mostly monitored weather systems and coordinated with emergency services when necessary. Marcy, the station administrator, greeted me with her usual warmth when I arrived. "You're looking rough around the edges," she observed, pushing a cup of coffee across her desk. "Outpost 7 getting to you?" I forced a casual laugh. "Just winter blues. The isolation's an adjustment." I hesitated before adding, "Actually, I was hoping to check some of the wildlife records while I'm here. Been seeing some unusual patterns I'd like to cross-reference." If Marcy found my request strange, she didn't show it. "Archives are in the basement. Most recent 5 years are digitized. Anything older is still on paper. Help yourself, but try not to mention it to Bennett. He's funny about people accessing old reports." The basement archives were a labyrinth of metal shelving units filled with cardboard boxes labeled by year and subject. I started with wildlife incident reports from the past decade, looking for anything unusual around Lake Kintla or the northern boundary. Most were routine: bear encounters, elk migrations, occasional mountain lion sightings. Then I found a folder simply labeled Unexplained Phenomena, Restricted. It wasn't sealed, though someone had written internal use only across the front in red marker. Inside were dozens of reports dating back nearly 70 years, all documenting unexplained occurrences in the park's northern region. I read about rangers hearing voices calling their names from empty forests, visitors claiming to see emaciated, impossibly tall figures stalking them through blizzards, hunting parties finding their game eviscerated and arranged in ritual-like patterns, teams of researchers experiencing collective hallucinations of hunger so intense they attacked each other before being rescued. Most disturbing were accounts of what local Blackfoot guides called Wetiko or Wendigo, winter spirits said to possess humans and instill an insatiable hunger for flesh. According to the notes, incidents spiked during particularly harsh winters, especially in areas around Lake Kintla and the Akaitapiwa region. I photographed as many documents as I could with my phone, knowing Bennett would never authorize me accessing these files. One report from 1978 caught my attention. A ranger named Howard Blackwell had documented ongoing encounters with what he described as a deer-like entity of impossible proportions near Outpost 7. His final entry, dated February 18th, simply read, "It's speaking to me now, using Michelle's voice, but Michelle has been dead for 3 years." Blackwell was found 2 weeks later, frozen to death on the shore of Lake Kintla, his body partially consumed. The ranger who disappeared before me, Morrison, had submitted a report just 2 days before he went missing. He described finding ladders made of bone and sinew, standing upright in the forest, leading nowhere. Search parties never found these structures, and Morrison's disappearance was officially attributed to an avalanche, though his body was never recovered. As I was replacing the files, I noticed a small leather-bound journal wedged behind one of the boxes. It had no official markings, just a name embossed on the cover: Catherine Shaw, 1932. I opened it and discovered the private diary of one of the park's first female rangers. Shaw's entries began professionally enough, describing weather patterns and wildlife sightings. By midwinter, her writings became increasingly disturbed. She wrote about hearing whispers in the forest, about feeling watched whenever she approached the lake. In her final entry, dated March 2nd, 1932, Shaw wrote, "The hunger calls to me each night now. Not my hunger, its hunger. It waits across the lake, patient as the mountains themselves. The Blackfoot were right to fear this place in winter. What walks here is older than their legends, older than the forests. I've seen it watching from between the trees, antlers rising like dead branches against the sky, body thin as famine. When it moves, it leaves no footprints, only the scent of decay. I know now why it's been calling me. It wants to wear my skin when mine has failed. I will not let it take me. Better to end things on my terms." Shaw's body was found in her cabin, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The official record listed her death as suicide due to isolation-induced psychosis. I was so engrossed in these discoveries that I didn't hear Bennett approach until his hand fell on my shoulder. "Find what you're looking for?" His voice was casual, but his eyes were hard as he glanced at the file spread before me. I forced myself to remain calm. "Just some background on local wildlife. Thought it might help me identify unusual tracks." Bennett's gaze lingered on Shaw's journal, which I'd failed to hide. "That's restricted material," he said quietly. "Not meant for seasonal staff. Sorry, I was just curious?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Curiosity's natural. But some things in this park are better left unexamined. The northern boundary has always been temperamental, especially in winter. I nodded, gathering my notes. "I'll stick to my assigned duties." "See that you do." Bennett helped me return the files, his movements methodical. Strange things happen in isolated places. The mind plays tricks. Best to focus on what's real, your patrols, your reports. Don't go looking for explanations to every odd sound or shadow. As I prepared to leave, Bennett added casually, "You know, we've had rangers request transfers from Outpost 7 before. No shame in it if you're finding it too isolated." "I'm fine," I insisted, perhaps too quickly. "Just getting my bearings." Bennett nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. "Weather Service is predicting another system moving in tonight. Heavy snow, possibly whiteout conditions. I'd head back now if you want to beat it." The drive back to my outpost was tense, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. The historical accounts matched what I'd been experiencing: the strange tracks, the sounds at night, the feeling of being watched. I wasn't imagining things, and I wasn't the first to encounter them. As predicted, the storm hit just as I reached my cabin. Wind howled around the eaves, snow falling so thickly I could barely see the edge of the porch from my window. I secured the shutters, built up the fire, and spread my notes across the table. If the legends were true, if something called a Wendigo was stalking these forests, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. According to the Blackfoot legends I'd found, Wendigos were once human, transformed by acts of cannibalism during desperate winters. They became insatiable, their bodies elongating as their hunger grew, until they were monstrous parodies of humanity, all starvation and appetite with no satiation possible. But other accounts described them as ancient spirits that possessed the vulnerable, particularly those isolated and hungry during winter months. The more I read, the more I realized how perfectly my situation aligned with the traditional circumstances for Wendigo encounters: isolation, winter, wilderness. That night, as the storm raged outside, I heard the scratching return, more insistent this time, accompanied by that wet clicking sound. But there was something new too, a voice, barely audible beneath the howling wind, calling my name in a familiar cadence. It sounded exactly like my father, who had died 2 years earlier. "I know you're not real," I whispered to the darkness. "I know what you are." The scratching stopped momentarily, then resumed with greater intensity. The voice changed, becoming a chorus of whispers, some pleading, others threatening. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The voices seemed to be inside my head now. I felt a sudden, gnawing hunger unlike anything I had experienced before, a hollowness that went beyond physical need. My hands shook as I clutched my rifle, fighting the urge to throw open the door and chase whatever waited in the storm. Instead, I forced myself to recite the emergency protocols I'd memorized during training, focusing on each word to drown out the whispers. By dawn, both the storm and the voices had subsided, leaving behind a transformed landscape buried under fresh snow. My radio crackled to life with Bennett's voice. "All outposts check in, storm damage report." One by one, the other rangers responded. When my turn came, I hesitated before keying the mic. "Outpost 7 reporting, minor snow damage to the north-facing side. All systems functional. No issues to report." I couldn't bring myself to mention the voices or my discoveries in the archives. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening and had evidence that couldn't be dismissed as stress or isolation-induced hallucinations. Outside my window, the morning sun glinted off the fresh snow, making the world look clean and innocent. But near the tree line, just visible through my binoculars, stood a single figure, tall and thin, its antlered silhouette stark against the white backdrop. It raised one elongated arm, pointing directly at my cabin. Even from this distance, I could see what looked like a smile spreading across its too wide face. "I see you too," I whispered, raising my camera to capture proof of what I knew was watching me. The photograph showed nothing but trees and snow, the figure conspicuously absent despite my clear memory of seeing it. I checked and rechecked the image, zooming in until pixels blurred, but found no trace of the antlered watcher. Either my mind was fabricating visions or, more disturbingly, whatever stalked me couldn't be captured by conventional means. 2 more weeks passed with escalating incidents. The clicking sounds circled my cabin nightly now, sometimes accompanied by mournful wails from the lake. Twice I woke to find crude symbols carved into my door, intricate spirals that matched drawings in Catherine Shaw's journal. Game cameras I'd set up along my patrol routes were either triggered by nothing or showed distorted images of what might have been a tall, emaciated figure moving between trees. I began losing weight despite maintaining my food intake. Sleep became elusive, my dreams populated by visions of endless hunger and frozen forests. Most alarming was my growing obsession with the lake. I found myself standing at its edge for hours, staring into its frozen surface as if expecting something to emerge. "You've been missing check-ins," Bennett's voice crackled through the radio one evening, concern evident despite the static. "Everything all right at Outpost 7? I hadn't realized I'd been skipping protocols. "Sorry, sir. Storm damaged the antenna. Had to make shift repairs." The lie came easily, though I knew the real reason. I'd been avoiding contact, afraid my voice might betray what I was experiencing. "We're sending a supply team your way tomorrow. Standard midwinter restock." His tone suggested this wasn't negotiable. "They'll check your equipment while they're there." After signing off, I spent hours organizing my cabin, hiding my research and notes about the Wendigo. Part of me wanted to confide in whoever came, to ask for help or transfer, but another part, growing stronger each day, felt possessive of my discoveries. This was my territory now, my hunt. The supply team arrived just after noon, 2 rangers I'd never met before, introducing themselves as Rivera and Kostova. They brought provisions, equipment parts, and mail, their casual conversation filling my cabin with normalcy that felt almost foreign after weeks of isolation. "Bennett asked us to check in on you specifically," Rivera mentioned while installing a new radio component. "Said you might be experiencing some adjustment issues." I bristled at the implication. "I'm fine, just focused on my work." Kostova, unpacking supplies at my table, paused at a folder I'd failed to hide. Photocopies of the Wendigo legends from the archives. "Interesting reading material," she remarked, her expression neutral. "The northern boundary has always had unusual folklore attached to it." "Just research," I said defensively. "Helps pass the time." They exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret before Rivera said, There's a station tradition of testing new rangers with scary stories. Wendigo tales are favorites. Don't let them get to you. We've all been where you are, Kostova added kindly. The isolation plays tricks. If you need a break from Outpost 7, just say the word. I nodded, letting them believe I was simply another ranger, spooked by solitude and legends. But as they prepared to leave, Rivera handed me a small leather pouch. My grandmother was Blackfoot, he explained quietly. This is for protection. Old ways still have power here. He seemed embarrassed by the gesture. Probably silly, but humor me. The pouch contained herbs with a pungent, almost medicinal scent. After they left, I hung it by my door, feeling both foolish and grateful. That night, for the first time in weeks, the sounds outside my cabin ceased entirely. The silence was more unnerving than the scratching had been. 2 days later, I found tracks in the snow leading from the lake directly to my cabin. Not the unusual elk prints I'd documented before, but human footprints. They approached my door, then circled the cabin before returning to the lake. The stride length was impossible, nearly twice what a normal human could manage. And the impressions were unnaturally deep, as if whatever made them carried tremendous weight. I followed them back to the lake, my heart pounding as I approached the shoreline. Near the edge, the ice had been broken, a dark hole gaping like an open mouth. Around it, the snow was disturbed in a circular pattern, with strange markings scraped into the ice, similar to the symbols on my door, but more complex. As I knelt to photograph them, I heard ice crack behind me. I turned to find a figure standing 20 yards away, tall and gaunt, its skin stretched tight over an elongated frame. Its head bore the partial remains of what might once have been antlers, now broken and malformed. But its face, God, its face was almost human, with sunken eyes that reflected nothing but hunger. I raised my rifle instinctively, but my hands shook so badly I couldn't aim. The creature made no move to approach, simply watching me with terrible patience. "What do you want?" I called, my voice thin in the winter air. It cocked its head, and when it spoke, the sound came not from its mouth, but seemed to emanate from all around me. "To where your hunger." I fired a warning shot that echoed across the frozen landscape. The figure didn't flinch, but when I blinked, it was gone. Vanished as completely as if it had never been there. Only the footprints in the snow proved I hadn't imagined the encounter. Back at my cabin, I radioed Bennett with shaking hands, no longer caring how I sounded. "I need to report a—" I hesitated, then continued. "An aggressive wildlife encounter near Lake Kintla." Bennett's response was measured. "What kind of wildlife?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Possibly human, but wrong. It spoke to me." Silence stretched before he replied. "Repeat that last part." "It spoke," I insisted. "I have tracks, photographs, evidence." Another long pause. "I'm sending a team first thing tomorrow. Sit tight, keep your doors locked. Could be an illegal hunter or someone suffering from exposure. Don't approach if you see them again." I spent that night barricaded inside, Rivera's protection pouch clutched in one hand, rifle in the other. The wind picked up around midnight, carrying with it sounds that might have been words in a language I almost recognized. By dawn, I was exhausted, but unharmed. The promised team never arrived. My radio calls went unanswered, except for occasional bursts of static that resolved into whispering voices when I listened closely enough. I knew I should leave, hike out to the main road if necessary, but something kept me rooted to Outpost 7, a compulsion stronger than fear. On the 7th day of silence, I woke to find fresh snow had fallen, covering any tracks outside my cabin. My supplies were dwindling. I would need to venture out soon. As I checked my remaining provisions, I noticed something odd. My hunger had disappeared entirely, not diminished but gone completely, replaced by a strange sense of lightness. That night, the scratching returned, but it came from inside the walls now. A soft, persistent sound like claws seeking entrance. The whispers returned too, no longer just my father's voice, but a chorus of everyone I'd ever known, all calling me toward the lake. I found myself standing at the shoreline without remembering the journey there. The hole in the ice had grown larger, black water lapping at its edges. My reflection in the water was distorted, too tall, too thin, my eyes sunken and ravenous. I understand now, I said to the presence I could feel watching from the trees. This isn't about hunger for food. The figure emerged slowly, moving with the careful precision of a predator approaching wounded prey. Up close, I could see how its limbs bent at unnatural angles, how its ribcage protruded through papery skin. Its eyes held recognition. It knew me as I now knew it. The hunger never ends, it said, its voice clearer now. But it can be shared. I nodded, understanding at last what had happened to Morrison, to Shaw, to all the others who had served at Outpost 7. They hadn't disappeared or died. They had transformed, becoming part of the Watcher in the woods, feeding the ancient appetite that could never be satisfied. Is there no other way? I asked, already knowing the answer. The creature extended one long-fingered hand. Winter is long. The forest provides too little. We hunger together or perish alone. I hesitated at the edge of choice, the last fragments of my humanity crying out against what I was considering. Behind me lay civilization, help, normalcy. Before me stood ancient hunger incarnate, offering communion of the most terrible kind. The frozen lake cracked beneath us, a decision being forced. As the ice gave way, I reached out, not in surrender, but with purpose born of newfound understanding. When the spring thaw came, Ranger Bennett led the team that found my abandoned cabin at Outpost 7. My equipment remained, my journal documenting increasingly paranoid observations about noises in the night and creatures stalking the forest. My body was never recovered. The official report cited presumed death by misadventure or exposure, noting my deteriorating mental state and the harsh winter conditions. A new ranger was assigned to Outpost 7 the following winter, and Bennett made sure to include Rivera's protective pouch with the standard equipment. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, rangers patrolling the northern boundary report hearing strange sounds from the direction of Lake Kintla, voices calling in the darkness, hungry and patient as the winter itself. Those who have served long enough know to turn back when they hear those calls. They know what waits among the trees, watching with hollow eyes and wearing a hunger older than the mountains themselves. For what walks in the frozen forests of Akaitapiwa was once human, as was I. And we are always hungry for company,